When I called to ask about my grandson's baptism, my daughter-in-law gave a light laugh and said, "We held it yesterday. Only people who fit the company's image were invited." I stood frozen in my old kitchen furnace, grease still on my hands. A week later, my son called at 6 in the morning. "Dad, did you transfer the money? The bank is pressuring us." That was when I finally understood all these years they had not seen me as a father. They had only seen my signature as the pillar holding up their luxurious life. Thank you for being here with me today. Before we dive in, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment. What are you doing while you listen? Driving, working, or just taking a quiet moment? Your presence means more than you know. A quick note. Some details have been adjusted for storytelling and reflection. The message, though, that's what I hope stays with you. When I called to ask about the baptism time, my daughter-in-law said 3 words that changed everything. "We did it yesterday." I stood in my kitchen coffee mug halfway to my lips, the morning sunlight cutting through the window above the sink. The phone felt suddenly heavy against my ear. "Yesterday," I said. "But I thought it was a small, intimate ceremony," Elaine said, her voice bright and efficient, the same tone she used in her Instagram videos. "Just immediate family, you understand." At 67, I'd spent 40 years installing heating systems in Pittsburgh homes, never imagining my greatest battle would be fought not with wrenches, but with withdrawal papers. My hands, scarred from decades of furnace work, tightened around the phone. "I'm immediate family," I said quietly. "I'm Zane's grandfather." "Of course you are, Bernard." She always called me Bernard, never Dad, even though she'd been married to my son for 3 years. But it was really more of a professional event. Kenton's clients were there. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was. My son, Kenton, 36, wore Italian suits to client meetings and spoke in the polished tones of someone who'd worked hard to forget his father fixed furnaces. 8-month-old Zane had no idea his baptism would become the flashpoint that tore his family apart. "A professional event," I repeated, "at St. Gregory's. Networking opportunities come in all forms these days." Her voice turned slightly harder. "Kenton's building something important, Bernard. Image matters. Image." The words sat in my chest like a stone. I thought about the check I'd written last year, $150,000 from the sale of my house. After Rose died, my late wife's life insurance. Everything I had so Kenton could expand Sutton Wealth Advisors. He'd promised me a small percentage enough to cover my modest retirement. Partners, he'd called us. Father and son building something together. "I would have liked to be there," I said. "I know, we'll do a big celebration dinner soon. Somewhere nice." She paused. "Kenton's in a meeting. I'll have him call you later." The line went dead. I set the phone down on the counter and stared at the cooling coffee. Through the window, I could see my neighbor mowing his lawn, the normalcy of a June morning in Squirrel Hill, carrying on without me. But something had shifted, a tectonic plate grinding beneath the surface of my careful denial. This wasn't an oversight. It was a choice. 40 years of fixing furnaces. 40 years so Kenton wouldn't have to. And this is what it bought me. I waited all day for Kenton to call back. He didn't. The next afternoon, I drove to St. Gregory's Church in Oakland, a stone building that had stood since before I was born. Father Sherman Callahan, 60, had baptized 3 generations of Pittsburgh families, but never suspected a ceremony could be weaponized. I found him in his office sorting through papers. "Mr. Sutton," he said, rising to shake my hand. His grip was warm, his eyes kind. "I didn't expect to see you. I thought, well, I assumed you'd been at the baptism." "So did I said. Understanding crossed his face. He sat back down slowly, gesturing for me to take the chair across from his desk. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have called to confirm, but Mrs. Sutton was very specific about the guest list." "I'm sure she was." He hesitated, then opened a drawer and pulled out a folded program. "I saved an extra. Your name was on the original draft, Mr. Sutton. He slid it across the desk. I picked it up, the paper crisp under my calloused fingers. There it was, neatly printed. Grandparents Bernard and Rose Sutton deceased. But someone had drawn a line through my name, a thick black mark that left Rose's name and the word deceased floating alone. Mrs. Sutton called the day before, Father Callahan said quietly. She said including you might send the wrong message to her husband's clients. The wrong message? The words came out flat. A grandfather attending his grandson's baptism. She said something about optics, professional optics. He looked uncomfortable. I should have pushed back. But families are complicated, and You did nothing wrong, Father. You think you know your own son. You think raising him alone after his mother died earns you something permanent. You're wrong. Elaine Sutton, 34, had perfected the art of turning family moments into brand opportunities, her Instagram feed a carefully curated lie. And my son had let her. More than that, he'd participated. He'd looked at his father's name on that program and agreed it should be removed, that a man who'd spent 4 decades keeping Pittsburgh homes warm wasn't the kind of family worth displaying. I studied the program, the erasure marks still faintly visible where my name had been. This wasn't about a missed invitation. This was calculated, strategic. They'd turned my grandson's baptism into a networking event and determined that I, the man who'd funded their expansion, who'd raised Kenton alone after Rose's death, who'd sacrificed everything so my son could have opportunities I never did, was bad for their brand. Thank you for this, I said, folding the program carefully. Mr. Sutton, I hope you and your son can work this out. So do I, Father. But as I walked out of that church into the June afternoon, the program tucked into my jacket pocket like evidence for a case I hadn't yet decided to build, I knew something had broken that couldn't be fixed with apologies or explanations. They'd made a choice about who I was to them. Now I would make a choice about who they were to me. The late afternoon sun caught the stained glass windows of St. Gregory's as I reached my car, throwing colored light across the parking lot. My phone buzzed a text from Kenton. Sorry, crazy day. Let's grab lunch next week. No mention of the baptism. No apology. No acknowledgement that he'd erased his father from his son's life. I slid the phone back into my pocket without responding and drove home through familiar Pittsburgh streets, past the houses where I'd installed furnaces and fixed broken heating systems, where families had invited me in for coffee and treated me like I mattered. In my home office, buried in the bottom drawer of my desk, sat 8 months of paperwork. Withdrawal forms, legal consultations, financial records showing exactly how much of Sutton Wealth Advisors belonged to me and exactly how much damage I could do if I decided to take it back. I hadn't decided yet. But the baptism program in my pocket with its telltale erasure marks felt less like a keepsake and more like kindling. The photograph was 23 years old, but I could still smell the antiseptic from the hospital room where Rose died. I sat at my kitchen table that evening, the baptism program beside a stack of photo albums I hadn't opened in years. Rose Sutton had worked 2 jobs while dying of pancreatic cancer, so Kenton could finish medical school debt-free, and her son hadn't visited her grave in 5 years. In the photograph, she was 48, thin from chemotherapy, standing beside 15-year-old Kenton at his science fair. Her smile was genuine despite the exhaustion carved into her face. I remembered how she'd insisted on going even though standing left her breathless. Just a few more years, Bernie, she'd said that night. Once Kenton finishes school, we'll take that trip to Maine. We didn't take the trip. Rose died 3 months before Kenton's graduation, her body finally giving out after pushing beyond what any doctor thought possible. She'd worked the hospital cafeteria and weekend bookkeeping, every penny saved for Kenton's future. I'd taken every overtime shift, fixed furnaces on Sundays, skipped vacations and new cars and restaurant meals. I spread financial documents across the table. Bank statements, investment records, The promissory note from when I'd sold our house and given Kenton the proceeds to expand Sutton Wealth Advisors. $150,000. Everything we'd saved. My late wife's life insurance cashed out and handed over because he needed capital. Then the loan guarantee. $450,000 of credit backing my signature, promising the bank I'd cover his debts if the firm failed. I'd signed without hesitation because he was my son. $600,000 total, 40 years of overtime and Rose's determination and every vacation we never took. And yesterday they'd erased my name from a baptism program because I might send the wrong message. When does love become obligation? When does sacrifice become transaction? When does a father become an ATM with a heartbeat? I picked up my phone. Bernice Blanchard, the manager at First Liberty Bank, who'd processed Kenton's credit line, had given me her cell with instructions to call any time. She was 56, a no-nonsense woman who'd worked her way up from teller and understood that business was built on trust, not Instagram followers. "Bernard," she answered, "everything all right?" "Bernice, I need to review every clause in that guarantee I signed for Kenton, particularly the contingencies." A pause. "The contingencies for withdrawal." "Yes, I can pull the documents Monday morning. Should I be concerned?" I looked at the baptism program at the black line through my name. "I'm doing due diligence. How dependent is the firm on that guarantee?" "Bernard, I shouldn't discuss client details, but since you're the guarantor," she lowered her voice. "They're drawn to 70% capacity. 315,000 outstanding. If that guarantee disappeared, the bank would reevaluate their entire credit facility. Meaning, they'd need replacement collateral immediately, or face a credit freeze. And in this market, with their client base still building." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. "Thank you, Bernice. Monday morning works fine." I hung up and stared at my notepad. 315,000 in active use. My signature kept Kenton's firm alive, and he'd repaid me by deciding I wasn't polished enough to photograph with his clients' children. The next call was harder. Nigel Moss was an attorney I'd met 20 years ago when he was a public defender, and I'd fixed his grandmother's furnace for free during a January cold snap. He'd never forgotten. Now he ran a small practice specializing in contract law, and he owed me a favor I'd never called in. "Bernard Sutton," he said warmly. "How are you?" "I need legal advice, Nigel. Hypothetically, if a guaranteed loan was predicated on family relationship, and that relationship was severed by the borrower's actions." "How severed?" I looked at the baptism program. "Deliberately excluded from family events. Erased from official documentation. Treated as a liability to their professional image." Nigel's voice shifted to professional precision. "Do you have documentation?" "I do. And the guarantee does it contain language about the relationship between guarantor and borrower. I'm getting the full document Monday." "Bernard, if there's contingency language about familial relationship integrity, and you can demonstrate a pattern of deliberate exclusion." He paused. "You might have grounds to withdraw the guarantee with cause. No damages claimed for your withdrawal." Rose would have forgiven him. Rose forgave everyone. That's why I'd scattered her ashes alone at sunset over Lake Erie, the place we'd met 45 years before. Kenton had been too busy with a client dinner to attend his own mother's memorial. He'd sent flowers with a card, "Sorry I couldn't make it. Work crisis. Work. Always work. Never family. Unless family could be photographed and posted." "Nigel," I said quietly, "I need you to review that guarantee. Look for every possible exit clause, every contingency, every scenario where I can walk away clean." "Are you sure he's your son?" "He was my son. Now I'm his balance sheet. I'll clear my schedule for Tuesday. Bring everything, the guarantee documentation of exclusions, any communications that demonstrate the relationship change." "No rush, Nigel," I said. "The lesson will arrive exactly on time." I hung up and sat in the gathering darkness, surrounded by photographs of sacrifices made and promises broken. Then I opened my home safe, the same safe where I'd kept Rose's jewelry for 30 years, and pulled out the original loan guarantee documents. The pages were dense with legal language, but I found it on page 4. Clause 7b. Guarantor maintains right to withdrawal with 30 days' notice if guarantor's continued familial relationship with primary borrower is materially compromised or terminated through borrower's deliberate action. Elaine had handed me the legal grounds when she erased my name from that program. When she turned my grandson's baptism into a networking event and decided a 67-year-old furnace technician didn't fit their brand. I just needed to document the pattern. And over the next 2 weeks, I would discover the baptism exclusion was only the most recent humiliation in a carefully constructed campaign to erase me entirely. The call from Bernice came on July 1st, and the first thing she said was, "Bernard, your grandson's baptism has 32,000 views on Instagram." I'd spent the weekend studying Clause 7b, documenting every interaction I could remember where Kenton or Elaine had treated me like a liability instead of family. But I hadn't expected this. 32,000, I repeated, setting down my coffee. I wouldn't have known. Bernice said, her voice tight with something between anger and disgust. Except Elaine sent our marketing department an internal memo asking us to share the posts across the bank's social channels. She wanted to emphasize young professional family values and multi-generational wealth building. I walked to my laptop and opened Instagram, a platform I'd created an account on 2 years ago and never used. Bernice walked me through finding Elaine's profile. There it was. Professional photography, not phone snapshots. Kenton in a tailored suit, holding Zane in an ornate white baptismal gown. Elaine in designer clothes, her smile perfect. The church's stained glass windows providing an elegant backdrop. Hashtags marched beneath the image, hashtag family values, hashtag wealth legacy, hashtag generational success, hashtag Sutton Wealth Advisors. They hashtagged it, I said quietly. They turned my grandson's baptism into a client acquisition funnel. There are 6 more posts, Bernice said. Professional photos from every angle. Testimonials from clients who attended. It's a full marketing campaign, Bernard. And I pulled Elaine's original memo from our files. What did it say? She hesitated. The exact words were, "Exclude blue-collar family associations that might undermine our premium positioning. This event targets high-net-worth demographics." The words landed like punches. Blue-collar family associations. My grandson was a prop, and I was the set piece they'd edited out in post-production. I scrolled through the comments. Congratulations from people I didn't know. Clients praising Kenton's strong family foundation and traditional values. Someone had even asked about Sutton Wealth Advisors' services directly in the replies, and Elaine had responded with a link to their website. "I'm emailing you the memo," Bernice said. "Bernard, I've worked in banking for 38 years. I've seen family businesses destroy relationships, but I've never seen someone weaponize a baptism. I'd held Zane exactly once for 47 seconds in the hospital, while Elaine posed for photos. I didn't make the Instagram cut. Babies and HVAC technicians don't photograph well together, apparently. Not when you're selling the image of generational wealth to people who think success means never getting your hands dirty." The memo arrived in my inbox 3 minutes later. Official First Liberty Bank letterhead, Elaine's signature at the bottom. Clinical language describing the baptism as a brand-building opportunity and requesting the bank's marketing team amplify messaging around family stability and legacy financial planning. There was a line item budget. Photography, $2,800. Venue coordination, $1,200. Social media promotion, $950. My grandson's introduction to God had a spreadsheet. I forwarded everything to Nigel Moss with a single line. "Is this enough?" He called back in 11 minutes. "I'll be at your house Wednesday afternoon. Tell Bernice to bring every piece of documentation she has. Wednesday arrived hot and humid, typical Pittsburgh July weather. I'd made iced tea and set out the documents on my kitchen table, the baptism program, with my erased name printouts of the Instagram posts, Elaine's memo, the original loan guarantee. Nigel Moss arrived first, carrying a leather briefcase that had seen better days. He was 55, though the gray at his temples made him look older. He'd built his law practice on the principle that family loyalty should never require financial suicide. Bernice came 10 minutes later with a folder thick enough to be a novel. She set it down with a heavy thud. Clause 7B covers material compromise of familial relationship, Nigel said, spreading the guarantee document across the table. That internal memo is a smoking gun, Bernard. They didn't just exclude you from a family event. They created a corporate marketing campaign that required your absence. Weaponized it, Bernice added. They commodified your family relationship while actively severing it. That triggers every contingency in this guarantee. Nigel tapped the memo. This document proves deliberate action to exclude you for business purposes, combined with the baptism program showing your name was removed and the social media campaign that monetized the event. He looked up at me. You have absolute legal standing to withdraw the entire $450,000. They won't even see it coming. For 40 years, I'd built the scaffolding that held Kenton up. Every overtime shift, every skipped vacation, every sacrifice Rose and I had made. It all formed the structure that let my son climb higher than I ever could. Now I was going to pull one beam, just one, and watch the whole structure fold. What happens when I withdraw? I asked. The bank notifies them immediately, Bernice said. They have 72 hours to provide replacement collateral or the credit line freezes. Given their current draw $315,000 outstanding, they'd need to find replacement backing fast. Can they? She and Nigel exchanged a glance. Not easily, Bernice said. Not in this market. Not without significant personal assets or another guarantor willing to stake that amount. And legally, I looked at Nigel. They can't come after me. Clause 7B is explicit. You have withdrawal rights if the relationship is materially compromised through borrower action. Elaine's memo proves borrower action. The Instagram campaign proves material compromise. They can't claim damages because they created the grounds for withdrawal. He pulled a single sheet of paper from his briefcase. I drafted this last night. He slid the document across my kitchen table, a withdrawal notice template requiring only signature and date. The header read, Notice of Guarantee Withdrawal under Clause 7B, Material Relationship Compromise. Once you file this with First Liberty, the guarantee evaporates in 72 hours, Nigel said. The bank will notify Kenton, but by then the paperwork is irreversible. I stared at the blank signature line, feeling the weight of 40 years of leverage condensed into one pen stroke. My name, my signature. The same hand that had signed Kenton's permission slips and college applications and wedding guest book. The same hand he'd decided didn't belong in his son's baptism photos. Don't sign yet, I said, surprising myself. I need to understand exactly how deep this goes. How dependent they really are. How far they'll fall. Nigel nodded slowly. Knowledge is power. But Bernard, don't wait too long. Every day that credit line is active, they're digging deeper into debt that your signature backs. I folded the notice and slid it into the drawer where I kept Rose's jewelry. Not yet. But soon. The BMW 7 Series appeared on Kenton's Instagram 5 days after he'd called, begging for immediate financial help, #blessed, #entrepreneur life. I'd decided to wait to understand the full scope of their dependence before pulling the trigger. So I opened my laptop and started where all modern investigations begin: social media. What I found in the next 3 hours made the baptism exclusion look almost quaint. The BMW came first, a gleaming black sedan parked in front of Sutton Wealth Advisors' new office. Kenton leaning against it in sunglasses, arms crossed. The caption read, Upgraded the ride to match the vision. Success is a mindset. Hashtag blessed, hashtag entrepreneur. Life, hashtag Sutton Wealth Advisors. The post was dated June 20th, 5 days after the baptism. 3 days after Kenton had called me asking when I could transfer the investment funds because the firm needed immediate liquidity for critical operational expenses. I scrolled further. Designer furniture for the new office, Herman Miller chairs, a conference table that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Posted June 28th with the caption, "Creating spaces where wealth conversations happen. First impressions matter in this business. Hashtag luxury lifestyle, hashtag Pittsburgh entrepreneur." A weekend trip to Turks and Caicos. Elaine in a bikini on a yacht, champagne glass raised. Celebrating Q2 growth, grateful for this journey. Hashtag work hard, play hard, hashtag Turks and Caicos. Gucci loafers, a Rolex. Date night at 11 Pittsburgh's most expensive restaurant. $200 omakase. Grateful for this life we're building together. Hashtag Sutton Wealth Advisors. Hashtag Pittsburgh Luxury. They weren't hiding it. They were advertising it. Using the firm's money, my money, they claimed they desperately needed to buy credibility they hadn't earned. I started taking screenshots. Methodically. Every post. Every luxury purchase. Every expensive dinner. Every designer label carefully positioned in the frame. Each one timestamped, hashtagged, geotagged. Public admissions of financial dishonesty posted for 32,000 followers to admire. I created a spreadsheet. The BMW lease roughly $1,800 a month. The office furniture at least $40,000. The vacation probably $12,000 for a week in the Caribbean in peak season. The Rolex $15,000 minimum. The dinners, the clothes, the lifestyle maintenance, call it another $20,000 over 3 months. $85,000. Conservatively. All charged to Sutton Wealth Advisors' business accounts. I'd bet my pension. All while Kenton called me asking when the investment would be ready because they were facing a cash flow crisis. How do you mourn someone who gave everything for a child who remembers nothing? How do you honor a sacrifice that's been converted into a BMW lease payment? I closed the laptop and sat in the gathering darkness of my kitchen. The house was silent except for the old refrigerator's hum, the same fridge Rose and I had bought 30 years ago because it was on sale. We'd never replaced it. She'd said appliances were functional, not decorative. Why spend money on stainless steel when white worked fine? 300 screenshots. 300 public admissions that the investment I'd been preparing to transfer Rose's life insurance, our house sale, everything we'd saved was funding their vanity, not their business. On July 15th, I opened the vintage home safe in my bedroom closet. The dial still turned smoothly, the same combination I'd set 28 years ago, Rose's birthday. Inside the paperwork first. Investment documents. The promissory note for the $150,000. The original agreement where Kenton had promised me a small percentage of the firm, enough for retirement security. Partners, he'd said. Building something together. Beneath the paperwork, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, Rose's silver cross. I lifted it carefully. The chain was delicate, the cross itself simple. No gemstones, no ornamentation. Just plain silver, tarnished now from years in the dark. Rose had received it from her mother on her 16th birthday. It was the only valuable thing she'd ever owned. She'd never worn it. "Jewelry is selfish," she'd said once when I'd suggested buying her a necklace for our anniversary. "Kenton needs textbooks, Bernie. I don't need decorations." Rose worked the overnight shift at Giant Eagle 3 days before she died. Stocking shelves with stage 4 cancer because Kenton's apartment deposit was due. The doctors had begged her to stop to rest, to let hospice make her comfortable. She'd refused. One more shift, one more paycheck, one more deposit into Kenton's future. He didn't visit her in hospice. Too busy studying for boards. He'd called twice, sent flowers once, showed up for the funeral in scrubs because he'd come straight from a clinical rotation he couldn't miss. "When I go, Bernie," Rose had said in those final days, her voice thin but firm. "Use my life insurance for his future. That's all I want. Promise me." I'd promised. I'd cashed the policy and held the money waiting for the right moment to invest in Kenton's success. Honoring Rose's dying wish, but sitting there with her cross in my hand, staring at the investment paperwork, I finally asked the question I should have asked a year ago. What did Rose actually mean by his future? Did she mean fund his BMW, finance his Turks and Caicos vacation, enable him to erase his father from his son's baptism because blue-collar associations undermined premium positioning? Or did she mean give him the foundation to become a man of character, someone who understood that success without respect is just expensive emptiness? Rose never wore this cross. Said it was selfish to spend money on herself when Kenton needed things. She worked herself to death, literally to death, so our son could have opportunities we never did. And he'd converted that sacrifice into Instagram content and designer furniture. Is this debt or weapon, Rose? Did you die so I could enable his greed, or so I could teach him what sacrifice actually means? I held her silver cross in one hand and pulled the withdrawal notice from the drawer with the other. The two objects sat in my palms like a scale. On one side, Rose's sacrifice. On the other, the tool to honor it. She hadn't said, give him everything forever. She'd said his future, and his future required learning that respect isn't purchased, it's earned. That family isn't a brand asset. That the man who spent 40 years fixing furnaces so you could wear Italian suits deserves more than erasure. The decision wasn't whether to sign the withdrawal notice anymore. That question had been answered the moment I saw Elaine's memo about blue-collar associations. The decision was when to execute it for maximum educational impact. When to pull the beam from the scaffolding so the lesson landed hard enough to reshape the man my son had become into someone Rose would actually recognize. On July 20th, I laid out the evidence in 3 rows across my kitchen table like a prosecutor preparing for trial. The question wasn't whether anymore. It was when. How to time the strike so it landed with the force of education, not just punishment. Rose's cross still sat beside the withdrawal notice, a reminder that this decision honored her sacrifice more than endless enabling ever could. I started with row 1, the baptism program my name crossed out in thick black ink. The printout of Elaine's Instagram post showing the ceremony I'd been excluded from 32,000 views and counting. The internal bank memo in Elaine's handwriting, exclude blue-collar family associations that might undermine our premium positioning. Exclusion. Documented deliberate public. Row 2 came next. Screenshots printed and arranged chronologically. The BMW, the Turks and Caicos vacation, the Rolex, the designer furniture, the $200 dinners, $85,000 in 3 months, all hashtagged with the firm's name, all posted while Kenton claimed desperate need for capital. I'd made a spreadsheet tracking every expense, every date, every caption. Exploitation. Systematic, shameless, photographed. Row 3 held the weapons I hadn't fully understood I was carrying. The loan guarantee, with Clause 7B, highlighted in yellow. The investment agreement for the funds I hadn't yet transferred. The deed history showing I'd sold my house, Rose's house, to give Kenton his start. And at the end of the row, Rose's silver cross, the one valuable thing she'd owned and refused to wear because our son needed textbooks more than she needed jewelry. Row 1 exclusion. Row 2 exploitation. Row 3 the weapons I didn't know I was carrying, I said aloud to the empty kitchen. 40 years of HVAC work reduced to 3 rows of paper. But these 3 rows would end the war. A prosecutor would call this exhibits A through G. I called it everything Rose and I had built weaponized by the person we'd built it for. The baptism exclusion alone might be forgiven as Elaine's influence. The spending might be dismissed as entrepreneurial image building. But together, arranged in chronological order, they told a story that couldn't be defended: systematic disrespect paired with systematic financial exploitation, all while my son smiled for cameras and hashtagged his blessings. You think you know the moment you stop being someone's father and become their bank. You don't. It happens so slowly you don't notice until you're holding the withdrawal papers looking at evidence that your grandson's baptism had a marketing budget. I sat down at the table and pulled the withdrawal notice toward me. Nigel had drafted it perfectly. Clean language, no emotion, just legal precision. Notice of guarantee withdrawal under Clause 7B, material relationship compromise. Below that, spaces for signature and date. I picked up the pen, the same one I'd used to sign Kenton's college financial aid forms, his medical school recommendation letters, the original loan guarantee that now sat in row 3. Rose never said, "Give him everything forever," I said to the cross. She said his future, and his future needs this lesson. Because what future did Kenton actually have if he never learned? If he spent his whole life believing that family was a resource to extract value from that respect, was optional, that the man who'd sacrificed everything deserved nothing but erasure when convenient. Enabling that, continuing to fund it, continuing to guarantee it, continuing to smile and accept disrespect, because blood demanded tolerance that would dishonor Rose's sacrifice more than any withdrawal ever could. Signing this didn't make me a bad father. It made me the father who finally stopped confusing love with transaction. I signed my name. The same signature that had backed Kenton for 36 years, now deployed to teach him what those 36 years should have already taught: that respect isn't purchased, it's earned, and relationships severed by greed don't get to keep the benefits of love. I dated it July 20th, 2023. 4 decades of leverage condensed into one document. 40 years I'd built the scaffolding. One signature, and I'd removed the center beam. But I didn't seal the envelope. A signature is just ink until it's deployed. A loaded gun sitting in a safe isn't power, it's potential. The power arrives when you aim it. I'd signed the withdrawal, made it legal, dated, ready to file. But timing mattered. If I mailed it now, Kenton would get the bank's notification and have 72 hours to scramble. He'd panic, maybe find alternative backing, maybe restructure. The firm might survive. He'd learn a lesson, sure, but a diluted one. No. The educational impact required precision. I needed to wait for the inevitable call. The one where Kenton demanded the investment funds, where his voice carried that entitled edge that assumed my money was his money, just delayed in transit. Where he'd talk about the firm's needs and growth opportunities, and maybe if I was lucky, he'd get irritated that I hadn't transferred it already. That call would come. Men like Kenton, who'd spent $85,000 on lifestyle in 3 months while claiming cash flow crisis, always needed more. The BMW lease payments didn't stop. The image maintenance was expensive. And I'd watched enough of his Instagram posts to know that August 1st meant quarterly estimated taxes were due. He'd call, probably soon, demanding, not asking. And when he did, when that entitled tone came through the phone, when he treated me like an ATM that was malfunctioning by not dispensing on command, that's when I'd hang up, walk to the mailbox, and send the withdrawal notice to First Liberty Bank. The signature gave me power, but power without timing was just noise. Let him call, I said to Rose's cross. Let him demand. Let him treat me like an ATM one more time. Because that's when they'd learn who actually held power in this relationship. Not when I signed it, but when I deployed it at the exact moment it taught the lesson most effectively. I slid the signed withdrawal notice into an envelope, unsealed, unaddressed yet, and placed it in my desk drawer next to the phone. The document was dated and legal, ready to file in 60 seconds. But I would wait. Wait for Kenton to call, demanding his mother's life insurance money. Wait for that entitled tone. Wait for one more confirmation that the lesson was absolutely necessary. Then, and only then, would I mail it and watch 40 years of leverage evaporate in 72 hours. The bank would notify Kenton that his credit line was no longer guaranteed, that he had 3 business days to provide replacement collateral or face immediate credit freeze. And Kenton would finally learn that fathers aren't banks, that respect isn't optional, that the man who built the scaffolding can also remove it. I didn't have to wait long. The phone rang 11 days later. The call came at 6:47 on a foggy August morning, and Kenton's first words weren't hello or how are you, they were, I need you to wire the money today. Taumo. 11 days since signing the withdrawal notice. I'd been awake since 5 drinking coffee watching fog roll through Squirrel Hill. When the phone rang, I knew the moment had arrived. Good morning, Kenton, I said. Dad, I don't have time. The firm has a quarterly shortfall. I need you to wire the $150 to the business account by end of day. Not how are you, not thanks for considering. Not I'm sorry about the baptism. Just I need you to wire. Why the rush, I asked. It's the first and we have obligations. Payroll, vendors, cash flow timing issues. His tone carried that familiar edge, the one that treated my money like his money just temporarily misplaced. Have you thought about the baptism? I said quietly. What, Dad, I don't have time for. Your son's baptism. June 14th, the one I learned about the day after. A pause. Not guilt. Irritation. Elaine handled the guest list. It was small, very last minute. We can talk about family stuff later, but right now I need to know if you can wire the funds today. No apology. No acknowledgement. No awareness that he'd done anything requiring explanation. He genuinely believed this was about logistics, not relationship. That I owed him money, and his only concern was whether the ATM functioned properly. Not can you help. Not I'm sorry. Just I need you to wire. Like I was his personal Federal Reserve. I'm not wiring anything, Kenton, I said. Not today, not this month, not ever. Silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. What do you mean, not ever? The investment isn't happening. The $150,000 stays with me. Dad, we had an agreement. You promised that money. We've been planning around it for months. We need it. You needed it, I corrected. Past tense. Before you turned my grandson's baptism into a marketing event and erased my name because blue-collar associations might hurt your premium positioning. Another pause. Elaine wrote that memo. That wasn't me. You can't hold the firm hostage because of one memo, one exclusion, one humiliation. I don't have time for this guilt trip. Are you seriously saying you won't honor your commitment because your feelings got hurt? 40 years. That's how long it took me to say the word no to my son. 40 years of yes, and of course, and how much do you need? The word felt foreign in my mouth. It tasted like freedom. My commitment was to a son who respected his father, I said. That son doesn't call at 6:47 demanding money without saying hello. That son doesn't exclude his father from family events for image management. That son doesn't exist anymore, Kenton. So neither does the commitment. You're making a huge mistake. The firm is leveraged on the expectation of that capital. If you pull out now, I'm not pulling out. I was never in. You assumed. That's different. He hung up without goodbye. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling the weight of what I'd just done. The first refusal. The first boundary. After 40 years of unconditional financial support, I'd finally said the word that should have been in my vocabulary from the beginning. Number. 4 days later, a manila envelope arrived. No return address, postmarked Pittsburgh. Inside, photocopied invoices from Sutton Wealth Advisors dated June through July. Someone I suspected, Bernice, though I'd never confirm, had decided I needed to see where the firm's money was going. Designer furniture for reception, $14,800. Purchased June 23rd, 9 days after the baptism. Professional photography package for headshots and office interiors, $8,200. June 27th. Custom walnut signage with brass lettering, $12,000. July 5th. Staging consultation for client-facing aesthetics, 5,000. July 12th. I spread the invoices across my kitchen table next to the BMW screenshots and Turks and Caicos photos. $40,000 in aesthetics, while demanding $150 in emergency operational funds. What kind of man spends $15,000 on furniture, while his father, who he just humiliated publicly, is supposed to wire emergency funds, a man who's never learned the word consequence? The crisis wasn't cash flow. The crisis was priorities. Kenton had built a firm that looked successful on Instagram, but hemorrhaged money on appearance. The BMW, the designer office, the photography all theater. And my investment was supposed to fund the next act. But I wasn't buying tickets anymore. I texted Bernice, "Thank you for the package. You didn't identify yourself, and I won't ask. But thank you." Her response came 3 minutes later. "What package? I hope you're well, Bernard." I smiled. Some allies understood plausible deniability. I filed the invoices in the folder labeled Prosecution Evidence next to the baptism program PR memo and social media screenshots. The case was complete. Exclusion, exploitation, entitlement, all documented, all undeniable. The withdrawal notice sat in its unsealed envelope in the desk drawer, signed and dated July 20th, needing only a stamp and a walk to the mailbox. Kenton had called demanding money at 6:47 a.m. on August 1st. I would mail the withdrawal notice at 9 a.m. on August 6th, giving him exactly 5 days to believe the money was coming, 5 days to make plans around capital that would never arrive, 5 days to dig deeper into the hole before discovering his entire financial foundation had evaporated. The lesson wouldn't just be about money. It would be about assumption, entitlement, and the consequences of treating family like a resource to extract rather than a relationship to honor. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of what my son had built on borrowed time and stolen dignity. Because the deeper his dependence, the more educational the collapse would be. I pulled out the original investment agreement from a year ago, the one where Kenton had first pitched Sutton Wealth Advisors' expansion. Every projection, every growth metric, every client acquisition target had been built on one unstated assumption that his father's money was guaranteed, not conditional. That respect was optional, but funding was permanent. He'd built his entire future on a foundation he'd never bothered to maintain. And in 72 hours, that foundation would disappear. The original business plan sat in my safe for 3 years, and I'd never noticed the word Kenton used most wasn't help or support. It was requirement. I'd set August 6th as the day to mail the withdrawal notice. 5 days after Kenton's entitled demand, long enough for him to believe the money was coming, short enough that he couldn't see what was bearing down on him. But first, I needed to understand exactly what he'd built on the assumption of my compliance. The business plan was bound in a leather portfolio, professional and impressive. Kenton had presented it 3 years ago at this same kitchen table, slides on his laptop, projections on glossy paper. I remembered being proud. My son, the entrepreneur. My son building something. I'd been too proud to read the fine print. Page 12. Financial requirements section. Required family investment, $150,000. Bernard Sutton, father/guarantor. Timeline year 1. Capital injection to establish operational foundation. Not requested. Not hoped for. Not if available. Required. I flipped to page 18, long-term capital strategy. Ongoing family support structure provides unlimited bridge financing for growth initiatives and temporary cash flow gaps. Unlimited. Bridge financing. Temporary gaps. Every projection, every growth metric, every client acquisition target was built on one unstated assumption that I would always say yes. That my wallet was his wallet. That respect was optional, but funding was permanent. "Dad, this is a can't-miss opportunity," he'd said that day 3 years ago, his laptop screen glowing between us. I just need you to bridge the initial capital gap until we're established. Bridge the gap. Like it was temporary. Like there was ever going to be an until. He'd told me the amount and the timeline, assuming I'd comply. And I had. I'd sold Rose's house, cashed her insurance policy, and prepared to hand over everything we'd saved, because that's what fathers did. Except he'd never asked. He'd required. Page 12 required family investment. I was a line item, not a father. A resource allocation, not a relationship. The entitlement hadn't started with the baptism exclusion. That was just the latest chapter in a story that began the day Kenton decided my love could be converted to capital without the inconvenience of gratitude. A foundation isn't just what holds you up. It's what you assume will always be there. What you never thank, never acknowledge, never consider might walk away. I'd been Kenton's foundation for 36 years. Foundations don't get invited to baptisms. They're just expected to bear the weight in silence. I closed the business plan and added it to the prosecution evidence folder. Row 4, premeditated entitlement. The pattern wasn't new. I'd just finally decided to notice it. 5 days later, I met Bernice and Nigel at First Liberty Bank. Bernice had reserved a small conference room on the second floor away from public areas. The table was polished oak, the chairs leather. Through the window, I could see Shadyside's tree-lined streets, August heat shimmering off the pavement. Nigel spread documents across the table with practiced efficiency. The loan guarantee, the credit facility agreement, bank covenants, legal opinions. Legal. Walk me through what happens, I said. Bernice opened her folder. The guarantee withdrawal triggers their material adverse change provision. Their primary credit line, the entire operating facility, collapses within 72 hours. Meaning the bank recalls the loan immediately. Kenton has 3 business days to provide replacement collateral, or the credit freezes entirely. No draws, no payments, no access. Nigel tapped the covenant agreement. The credit facility is the firm's operational bloodline. Without it, they can't make payroll, can't pay vendors, can't function. It's not just losing access to future funds, it's being required to repay what's already drawn. $315,000, I said, remembering Bernice's earlier assessment. As of last week, she confirmed. Probably higher now given their spending patterns. I looked at the documents, feeling the weight of what I was about to unleash. Can they recover? Bernice and Nigel exchanged a glance. Theoretically, yes, Nigel said, if they can find another guarantor willing to back that amount, or if they have personal assets sufficient to secure the loan independently. Do they? The BMW is leased. The house has a mortgage. They're liquid assets. Bernice shook her head. Based on what I've seen, they've been converting capital to lifestyle. They don't have reserves. You spend decades building someone's future, and you convince yourself that's love. Then one day you realize love without respect is just construction work, and construction workers can quit the job. You're not just withdrawing support, Bernard, Nigel said quietly. You're removing the foundation. Everything built on your assumed compliance falls. Then everything falls into proper place, I said. They built a business on sand that wasn't theirs. I'm reclaiming my sand. Bernice pulled out a single sheet of paper, a timeline rendered in neat boxes and arrows. This is what happens hour by hour. I studied the cascade. Hour 0, withdrawal filed. Hour 72, guarantee void. Hour 96, lender notified. Hour 120, credit facility frozen. Hour 168, Sutton Wealth Advisors, illiquid. 1 week from filing to complete operational paralysis. The firm can't survive this, I asked. Not without significant restructuring, Nigel said. They'd need emergency capital, alternative backing, probably asset liquidation. The BMW, the designer furniture, the aesthetics budget, all of it would have to go. And even then, the damage to their reputation. Clients don't stay with firms in financial crisis. Bernice finished. Especially wealth management clients. They want stability, not drama. I picked up the timeline and folded it carefully, creasing the edges with precision. The document felt heavier than it should, like it contained not just hours, but consequences. 1 week from filing to complete operational paralysis, Nigel said, watching me. The question is whether you want to watch it happen slowly or whether you want to be there when Kenton realizes what you've done. I slid the timeline into my jacket pocket next to the unsigned withdrawal notice. I want him to understand why. Not just what, but why. That's not a legal question, Nigel said. No, I agreed. It's a father's question. Bernice leaned forward. Bernard, once you file this, there's no taking it back. The bank is required to act immediately. Are you certain? I thought about the baptism program with my name erased. The PR memo about blue-collar associations. The Instagram posts hashtagging my grandson. The BMW purchased with money Kenton claimed he desperately needed. The business plan that listed my love as a required line item. I've never been more certain of anything, I said. The confrontation would come sooner than Nigel expected. Because before I mailed that withdrawal notice, Kenton needed to understand exactly what foundation he'd been standing on, and exactly whose labor had built it. The email was dated June 1st, 2 weeks before the baptism, and the subject line read, Final Guest List and Media Strategy. Another anonymous envelope arrived Monday morning. Inside, printed emails between Kenton and Elaine discussing my grandson's baptism like a corporate product launch. The decision whether to confront before executing the withdrawal was made for me. I drove to Sutton Wealth Advisors on August 20th, the emails in a folder beside me. The office was everything I'd seen on Instagram: designer furniture, brass signage, Herman Miller chairs. A receptionist smiled professionally. I'm here to see Kenton Sutton. I'm his father. Her smile faltered. Do you have an appointment? He'll see me. Kenton appeared 2 minutes later, expression guarded. Dad, what are you doing here? I held up the folder. We need to talk. Your office. His office overlooked the city floor-to-ceiling windows. I didn't sit. I placed the email on his desk. June 1st, 2 weeks before Zane's baptism. Subject: Final Guest List and Media Strategy. Your name in the CC field. My name absent from the list. Kenton glanced at it. Recognition, not confusion. Dad, it wasn't personal. Elaine explained the optics. I thought you'd understand business sometimes requires difficult choices. You had 2 weeks to tell me I wasn't invited to my grandson's baptism. You chose to let me call and ask like a fool. That's not business, Kenton. That's cowardice. You're taking this too personally. It was brand positioning, client demographics. I understand perfectly. You received this June 1st. I called June 15th asking about the time. You said nothing. You let me discover it from Elaine the next morning. You were complicit. I was trying to keep peace in my marriage by making war with your father. He looked toward his expensive view. What do you want an apology? Fine. I'm sorry. Can we move past this? No, I said quietly. We can't. I left before he could respond. 5 days later, I drove to Soickley Heights. Elaine answered the door in athleisure that probably cost more than my pension. Bernard, Kenton's not here. I came to talk to you. She sighed and stepped aside. The house was magazine perfect. White marble chrome fixtures, abstract art. Everything curated, nothing comfortable. We stood in the foyer. I've seen the emails, the guest list, the media strategy, the memo about blue-collar associations. The baptism was client relationship building, Bernard. Premium brand positioning requires curated guest demographics. You wouldn't understand. I understand you turned my grandson into a marketing prop, and my son into someone who lies by omission. This is why we made the decision we did. You take everything personally. Business requires objectivity. Family isn't business. Everything is business if you're building something that matters. Elaine looked at me like I was tracking mud on her imported marble. And I realized that's all I'd ever been to her. something dirty, something that needed to be kept out of the photographs, edited from the narrative hidden in the footnotes of Kenton's carefully curated success story. "If you're here for an apology, you're wasting your time," she said. "This is business. Maybe if you'd built something instead of installing furnaces, you'd appreciate strategic thinking." I smiled. I did build something. I built Kenton. And I'm starting to think that was my biggest strategic error. I left her in her perfect foyer. 3 days later, I was watering tomato plants in my backyard when Cora Knight approached from next door. 65, silver-haired, she'd lived next to me long enough to know when a man's silence spoke louder than anger. "Bernard, I hope you don't mind. I wanted to check on you." "I'm fine, Cora. Thank you." "You're not fine. And that's okay." She paused. "I've lived next door 32 years. I know what a good man looks like when his family mistakes kindness for weakness." I set down the watering can. "I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm just done being an ATM with a heartbeat." "Good. You're not fighting alone. This neighborhood has watched you raise that boy, bury your wife, and keep your dignity through it all. We see what they're doing, and we see how you're handling it with grace they'll never deserve. You think isolation is the worst thing that can happen when family turns on you. It's not. The worst thing is realizing you were never as alone as they wanted you to believe. That people were watching. That your dignity mattered to someone. I've kept a journal," Cora said quietly. "Dates, observations. Not because I was spying, but because I'm old enough to know that good people sometimes need witnesses. If you ever need someone to confirm what you've endured, what you've given, how they've treated you, I'm here." 32 years. She'd watched Kenton grow up, watched Rose die, watched me become a widower and keep going. She'd seen the visits become less frequent, the conversations shorter, the son who used to help me turn into the man who didn't invite me to his son's baptism. "Thank you, Cora. Whatever you're planning, know that you're not wrong. You're not vindictive. You're not the bad guy. I've watched it unfold for years, and you've shown more restraint than I would have." After she left, I stood watching the August sun set over Squirrel Hill. Kenton's advanced knowledge, Elaine's condescension, Cora's witness testimony. The evidence kept mounting. The decision wasn't whether to withdraw support anymore. That question had been answered. The decision was whether to tell Kenton it was coming or let him discover it when his world collapsed. I pulled out my phone and texted, "We need to meet. Thursday, August 30th, your office 10 a.m. This is not optional." His response came 5 minutes later, "Fine. No curiosity, no concern, just fine." The final confrontation before execution would happen in 2 days. And then Kenton would learn that foundations, no matter how patient, can walk away. I canceled the meeting with Kenton 5 minutes after scheduling it, realizing that everything I needed to say could be expressed in one signature and a stamp. His response, "Fine," had told me everything. No concern, no curiosity about why his father had demanded a meeting. Just fine, like I was a vendor requesting a payment discussion. That single word confirmed what 40 years of conversation had failed to teach: words don't change entitled people. Consequences do. I spent August 30th organizing the complete prosecution case. Every piece of evidence that had accumulated over 3 months laid out in chronological order across my dining room table. The baptism program with my name crossed out. Elaine's PR memo about blue-collar associations. Printouts of social media posts documenting luxury spending. Invoices for the BMW, the furniture, the Turks and Caicos vacation. Kenton's email from June 1st proving advanced knowledge. Elaine's dismissive statements about strategic thinking. Cora's offer to serve as witness. I labeled each piece. Exhibit A through M. 14 items documenting the systematic conversion of father into ATM. 40 years of sacrifice reduced to 13 pieces of paper and one neighbor's testimony. "Canceled the meeting," I said aloud to the empty room. What would I say? Please respect me. Please acknowledge 40 years begging doesn't teach. Consequences teach. I pulled out Nigel's timeline chart, the cascade of hours from filing to collapse. Hour 0, I mail the withdrawal notice. Hour 72, guarantee legally void. Hour 96, First Liberty Bank notifies Kenton. Hour 120, credit facility frozen. Hour 168, Sutton Wealth Advisors illiquid. 1 week from envelope to education. I reviewed the withdrawal notice one more time. Clean language, no emotion, just legal precision. Notice of guarantee withdrawal under Clause 7B, material relationship compromise. Below that, my signature and the date. July 20th, the day I'd decided. 6 weeks ago now, though it felt like longer. The notice had been ready for weeks. I'd carried it in my desk drawer, unsigned envelope, waiting for the perfect moment. But I'd realized something during the confrontations with Kenton and Elaine. There was no perfect moment. There was only the moment when you decided the lesson mattered more than the relationship. I sealed the envelope. First Liberty Bank's address in neat letters, stamp in the upper right corner. Everything ready except the walk to the mailbox. 40 years, I was Kenton's foundation. Invisible, assumed, never acknowledged, until the weight became too much. Tomorrow I stop being concrete and become air. Let's see what stands without me. I organized the exhibits into a folder labeled Documentation for Legal File Sutton versus Sutton Wealth Advisors. Not that I plan to sue, but archiving the evidence felt important, like creating a record that this happened, that I wasn't imagining the disrespect, that the exclusion and exploitation were real and documented and undeniable. The folder went into my safe next to Rose's silver cross and the original business plan. Everything that mattered, everything that had led to this moment, locked away together. By evening, the preparation was complete. The withdrawal envelope sat on my desk. My calendar showed September 1st circled in red, tomorrow. The day everything changed. I made dinner, though I barely tasted it. Scrambled eggs and toast, the same meal Rose used to make when she was too tired from her shifts to cook anything elaborate. I washed the dishes and dried them, put them away in cabinets that had held the same plates and glasses for 30 years. The house was quiet, except for the kitchen clock, ticking the refrigerator, humming the familiar sounds of a life lived alone. By 11 p.m., rain started. Soft at first, then steady, the kind of late summer rain that cools everything down and makes you think about transitions. I sat in my study with the lights low, the sealed envelope on my desk, watching rain streak down the window. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., I walk to the mailbox, I said to the empty room. 3-minute walk. 40 years of leverage evaporates in the time it takes to drop an envelope. The rain against my study window sounded like Rose's fingers on the kitchen table when she was thinking. Tap, tap, tap. She'd tap 3 times when she'd made a decision. Tonight, the rain tapped 3 times and stopped. Even the weather agreed. I imagined her sitting across from me the way she used to in this same study, when we'd discuss Kenton's college applications or medical school finances. She'd ask if I was sure. I'd tell her I'd never been more certain of anything except marrying her. What would you say, Rose? I asked the darkness. The rain started again, softer now. I chose to interpret that as approval. Tomorrow wasn't just about the withdrawal. It was about permanent redefinition. For 40 years, our relationship had been built on my unconditional support and Kenton's unconditional taking. I'd believed that's what fathers did, give without limit support, without condition, enable without question. But Rose hadn't raised Kenton that way. She taught him responsibility, reciprocity, respect. Somewhere between her death and his success, those lessons had been unlearned, or maybe just discarded as inconvenient to his carefully curated image. Tomorrow I stopped being the father who enables and became the father who teaches. Not through words, those had failed for decades. Through irreversible consequence. Through the removal of everything he'd built on the assumption of my permanent compliance. Tomorrow everything changes, I said. Not just for Kenton, for me. Tomorrow I stop being the father who enables. I become the father who teaches. The rain had stopped again, leaving only silence and the faint reflection of my study lamp in the dark window. I looked at the envelope on my desk, stamped and sealed and ready. Next to it, my keys and wallet, everything I'd need for tomorrow's walk to the post office. September would begin with consequences. The kind that couldn't be argued away or ignored or dismissed with corporate jargon about strategic thinking. The kind that restructured reality. I placed the sealed withdrawal envelope on my desk next to my keys and wallet, everything I'd need for tomorrow's 9 a.m. walk to the post office. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving only silence. I'd spent 40 years building Kenton's future, 3 months documenting the betrayal, and one night accepting that tomorrow I would dismantle everything with a stamp and a signature. The envelope sat there like a loaded gun, waiting for morning. September would begin with consequences. The envelope disappeared into the blue mailbox at 9:03 a.m. on September 5th, and 40 years of unconditional support disappeared with it. I'd woken at 6, made coffee, eaten toast I didn't taste. The envelope sat on my kitchen table beside my keys. At 8:50, I picked it up. Standard business envelope, nothing to indicate it contained the demolition of my son's financial foundation. The walk to Forbes Avenue post office took 3 minutes. Early September morning, warm but not hot. I passed Cora watering her garden. She waved. I waved back. 2 blocks. Past the coffee shop where I used to take Kenton for hot chocolate. Past the corner where Rose and I waited for the bus on our first date. 3 minutes. 40 years of leverage evaporating in the time it takes to walk 2 blocks. The blue mailbox stood outside the post office, ordinary and permanent. I held the envelope for a moment. Inside one page. Outside the end of everything Kenton had built on assumption. I dropped it in. The metal door clanged shut. No earthquake. No lightning. No drama. The carrier would pick it up this afternoon. First Liberty would receive it tomorrow. The countdown would begin. Oh, I walked home. By 9:06 a.m., I was back at my kitchen table with cold coffee. You think the big moments in your life will feel momentous: wedding vows, first house, child's birth. This felt like mailing a utility bill. Drop envelope, hear the metal clang, walk away. That's how 40 years ended. With a clang. I emailed Bernice. The notice is mailed. Confirmation number 94055036993002894466. It's done. Her response came in 4 minutes. Bernard, I've logged the termination request. Guarantee voids at 9:03 a.m. September 8th. 72 hours from now, your obligation evaporates. There's no reversing this. Are you certain? I've never been more certain of anything. 3 days. 72 hours for delivery, processing, execution. The boulder rolling downhill toward Kenton's world. I spent those days in strange calm. Worked in my garden. Read. Called my brother, had a normal conversation. The withdrawal was in motion, unstoppable. On September 8th at 10:15 a.m., 63 minutes after the guarantee legally voided, my phone rang. Kenton. He'd clearly decided that my silence since August first meant compliance. In Kenton's world, a father who stopped arguing had simply come around. Silence was surrender. No answer was the same as yes. Dad just wanted to say thanks for coming through. I know we've had rough patches, but you always show up when it counts. The transfer Friday, right? I sat very still. What transfer? The 150, for the expansion. I've already told our landlord we're taking the additional space. Signed the lease amendment yesterday. Deposits due Monday, but I told them funds hit Friday. Kenton, I never agreed to wire anything. We haven't spoken since you demanded money on August 1st. A pause. Then irritation. Come on, Dad, don't be like that. We talked about this. You said you'd handle it. I never said that. You implied it. When I called, you didn't say no. I said no explicitly. I said I'm not wiring anything, not today, not this month, not ever. You hung up on me. He thanked me. Kenton actually thanked me for help I never agreed to provide. The guarantee had been void for 63 minutes when he called. He was thanking a ghost. Dad, I don't have time for games. I've made commitments based on your support. The deposit is $12,000. The contractor starts Monday. Are you seriously going to leave me hanging? I could have told him then. Could have explained that while he was signing lease amendments, his credit guarantee had evaporated. That the notification email would arrive tomorrow at 9 a.m. That every plan was built on nothing. But I didn't. We clearly remember this conversation differently. Whatever. Just confirm the wire goes Friday. I need to tell the contractor when to start demolition. You're demolishing walls for the expansion. 2 additional offices, larger conference room. $60,000 renovation. I showed you the plans. You never showed me any plans. I emailed them last month. I never received them. Pause. Then quieter. Look, I'm trying to build something here. Something for my family, for Zane's future. I need to know you're with me. The wire Friday, yes or no. This was the moment. I could tell him the truth, that the guarantee voided 63 minutes ago, that his credit would collapse within days, that every expansion plan was about to become uncovered liability. Or I could let him discover it tomorrow morning. We clearly have different understandings of our conversations. So that's a yes, the wire goes Friday. I never agreed to wire you money, Kenton. But you're not saying no. I'm saying I never agreed. Fine. I'll take that as a yes. I'll watch for it Friday. Thanks, Dad. Gotta run meeting with the contractor in 10. He hung up. I sat there processing. Kenton had either constructed false memory or deliberately deluded himself. He'd heard what he needed to hear, filtered reality through entitlement, and convinced himself the money was coming. Now he'd committed to expansion space, signed leases, scheduled. Contractors promised his landlord, all based on capital that would never arrive, and a guarantee that no longer existed. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., the bank's automated system would email Kenton and his lender. Clinical legal final notice of credit guarantee termination effective September 8th, 2023, 9:03 a.m. 72 hours from termination. No reversing, no undoing. I let him plan expansion spaces and promise landlords and schedule contractors, all based on money that would never arrive, and a guarantee that no longer existed. The bank's notification would email tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., exactly 72 hours after termination. Tomorrow, Kenton's carefully constructed illusion would detonate. I would be watching when it happened. 6 days after the bank's notification email detonated Kenton's world, my son still hadn't called, and Nigel Moss was standing at my door saying we needed to talk immediately. The notification had gone out September 9th at 9 a.m. sharp, 72 hours after termination. Clinical, legal, final. Notice of credit guarantee termination effective September 8th, 2023, 9:03 a.m. Borrower must provide replacement collateral within 48 business hours, or credit facility will be suspended. I'd expected the phone to ring within minutes. Kenton calling to rage, to beg, to demand explanation. But 6 days had passed in strange silence. No calls, no texts, no furious appearance at my door. Just silence. And now Nigel stood on my porch, leather briefcase in hand, his expression somewhere between urgent and concerned. Bernard, we need to talk. Now. I let him in. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd organized the prosecution evidence, where I'd signed the withdrawal notice, where 40 years of decisions had led to this moment. Nigel opened his briefcase and pulled out documents. September 9th, the notification detonated. 6 days of silence from Kenton. His lender called me yesterday asking about your liability exposure. That's when I found it. Found what? I did a post-withdrawal legal review standard procedure. I've been reviewing Clause 7b and the cross-referenced covenant structures. He spread pages across the table. Bernard, I missed something. Something significant. My stomach tightened. What did you miss? Not a problem, an advantage. A massive one. He tapped the guarantee document. Clause 7b doesn't just allow withdrawal. It creates absolute immunity. I stared at him. Explain. The material compromise of familial relationship language isn't just withdrawal grounds. It functions as a complete legal shield. Any attempt by Kenton to pursue legal action against you for damages related to the withdrawal is explicitly prohibited under the same clause that allowed you to withdraw. Meaning you're not just protected from liability, you're untouchable. The clause creates what's called an automatic estoppel. If Kenton tries to sue you for withdrawing support, the court would dismiss immediately based on his own material compromise of the relationship. 6 days. In 6 days, Kenton could have called to apologize, to explain, to beg. Instead, 6 days of silence while his lawyer researched ways to sue me. That told me everything about what our relationship had always been. Why did his lender call you? I asked. Because they're trying to assess recovery options. When a guarantee this size evaporates, lenders look for alternative recourse. They wanted to know if they could pursue you for tortious interference or bad faith withdrawal. And I told them no. Clause 7b is airtight. But that conversation made me dig deeper into the covenant structure. That's when I found the real weapon. He pulled out another document, highlighting visible in yellow marker. Kenton's credit facility wasn't his only debt. He has a personal line of credit, a home equity loan, the BMW lease, all of them contain cross-default provisions. Standard practice, I said. Yes. But here's what makes this nuclear. All of those agreements include a clause that triggers immediate default if the borrower initiates litigation against a family member related to financial obligations. It's a creditor protection mechanism. Banks don't want borrowers wasting money on family lawsuits when they owe the bank money. Before I tell you what that clause truly means, are you still with me? Comment. If you think Kenton will try to sue anyway, or B, if you think he'll back down, add one short reason why. Please note the next part includes some recreated legal details for narrative purposes. So if Kenton sues me, if Kenton attempts any legal action against you related to the withdrawal, it automatically triggers default on every other credit agreement he signed. The personal credit line, $25,000. The home equity loan, $80,000. The BMW lease, which has an early termination penalty of $12,000. All of it becomes immediately due and payable. I sat back processing. How immediately? Within 30 days of filing. The banks get notification of any lawsuit through automated court filing systems. The moment Kenton's attorney files a complaint, every creditor gets pinged. They'd send default notices within 48 hours. And if he can't pay, then it's not just business bankruptcy, it's personal bankruptcy. The house, the car, any remaining assets, all of it goes to satisfy creditor claims. He'd lose everything. For 40 years, I'd been holding a rope attached to Kenton's safety net. I thought letting go would just remove the net. Turns out the rope was also holding back a guillotine, and Kenton's neck was already on the block. You're saying any attempt to sue me would personally destroy him, completely. And Bernard, he doesn't know this yet. His lawyer hasn't figured it out. I checked the court filings database, nothing filed yet. If they understood the cross-default trap, they'd have abandoned litigation strategy already. So what happens now? Nigel slid 3 pages across the table. Clause 7b highlighted cross-default provisions, circled bankruptcy trigger conditions, underlined in red. Your son has exactly 2 choices. Accept the consequences with dignity or try to fight you legally and lose everything: the firm, his house, his personal assets, everything. The withdrawal already collapsed the business. Litigation would destroy him personally. I picked up the pages, reading the dense legal language that I'd signed 3 years ago without understanding. The immunity clause, the cross-default provisions, the bankruptcy triggers. All of it there, documented, legally binding. The power is entirely in my hands, I said quietly. Yes, you're not just protected, Bernard. You're in complete control. Kenton can accept reality, or he can try to fight and discover that fighting you is the one thing guaranteed to destroy what little he has left. I looked at the documents, feeling 40 years of powerlessness transform into something I'd never experienced before: complete control. Not just revenge, not just consequences, absolute strategic dominance. Kenton didn't know about the trap yet. His lawyer hadn't figured it out, and the question now was whether my son would discover the guillotine before putting his neck on the block, or whether he'd sue me anyway, driven by entitlement and rage, and learn too late that I'd built the perfect legal mousetrap 3 years ago without even knowing it existed. The separate checking account appeared in Elaine's name on September 10th, exactly 1 day after the bank's notification destroyed Kenton's business, and I realized she hadn't been shocked by the collapse at all. Nigel had revealed the bankruptcy trap waiting for Kenton. But while I'd been focused on my son's legal options, I'd missed what his wife was doing. Bernice called September 20th. Bernard Elaine opened a new checking account at First Liberty. Personal account, only her name. September 10th at 3:47 p.m. 6 hours after the notification. Not shock. Preparation. Did she transfer funds? Nothing from joint accounts yet. But she's had activity. I wanted you to know she's positioning for something. I started paying attention. Elaine's Instagram had gone silent after September 9th. No more luxury posts, no more hashtags, no more curated family moments. The feed just stopped. But her activity elsewhere told a different story. I called an old client whose nephew worked in telecommunications. Call logs, not content, just numbers. 23 phone calls to Chicago area code 312 between September 9th and 20th. The number belonged to Rufus Riddle, 42, who'd kept Elaine's number saved under a fake name, waiting patiently in Chicago for her inevitable return. Kenton had mentioned him once. Elaine's ex-boyfriend, some venture capital guy in Chicago. She said they ended things when she moved to Pittsburgh. Apparently, they'd paused them. Credit card statements through Bernice's updates, luxury purchases, September 9th and 10th. Gucci, Prada, Louis Vuitton. $12,000 before Kenton could freeze the cards. She wasn't his wife. She was a looter fleeing a burning building. Flight search history from a friend in digital marketing, one-way tickets to Chicago, flexible dates, premium economy. Not searching, shopping, planning. What kind of woman plans her escape before the disaster even strikes? The kind who knows disasters are coming because she's helping orchestrate them. The kind who turns a grandson's baptism into a networking event while wiring money to her backup plan in Chicago. Elaine hadn't been caught off guard. She'd positioned herself to abandon Kenton the moment his finances imploded. Exit strategy complete, backup life waiting. 5 days later, Bernice called again. Bernard, I need to show you something. After we close. I met her at First Liberty at 6 p.m. on September 25th. 47 pages of transaction records documenting Elaine's financial activity over 4 months. 7 refinancing applications in 2 weeks, Bernice said. Every bank rejected him. The withdrawal triggered material adverse change clauses across his entire portfolio. He's radioactive to lenders. And Elaine, Bernice slid another stack across. Her account shows wire transfers to Rufus Riddle starting June 18th. I stared at the date. June 18th. 2 weeks before Zane's baptism. How much? $5,000 that first transfer. Then 3 more $2,500 each in July, August, September. Total $15,000 to a man who isn't her husband. June 18th. I remembered that date. Kenton had called asking about the business plan, sounding stressed about cash flow. While he was asking his father for financial help, his wife was wiring money to another man. The baptism exclusion 3 weeks later wasn't about brand positioning. It was about cleaning house before checkout. She wasn't building a life with Kenton, I said. She was positioning an exit while extracting maximum value. 4 months of planning. And there's more. Storage unit rental in Chicago started July 1st, under her maiden name Elaine Crawford. Monthly charges of $200. Shon. She's been moving things out, slowly, carefully. But yes, she's been preparing a Chicago landing for at least 3 months. I looked at the 47 pages. Wire transfers. Luxury purchases timed before freezes. Separate accounts in her maiden name. Storage unit under alias. 23 calls to her ex. Kenton thought he was building a marriage and a business. Elaine was running a 4-month extraction operation with a pre-planned escape route. Does he know about the wires to Rufus? The storage unit? The separate account? I don't think so. He's been too focused on trying to save the firm, on finding replacement financing, on figuring out if he can sue you. Can I get copies? Bernice looked at me. I could lose my job for this. I know, but I've watched you for 30 years. Watched you work overtime to pay for Kenton's education. Watched you bury your wife and keep going. Watched you sign that guarantee because your son asked. She pushed the stack toward me. I've also watched Elaine treat you like you were tracking mud on her marble. Take them. I took the 47 pages home and read them cover to cover. Every wire transfer, every luxury purchase, every piece of the exit strategy Elaine had constructed, while Kenton believed they were building something together. The baptism, PR memo made sense now. The Instagram campaign, the exclusion of blue-collar associations. It wasn't about Sutton Wealth Advisors' brand. It was about Elaine's personal brand, the image she'd present returning to Chicago's venture capital scene with Rufus. She'd needed Kenton to look successful long enough to extract value. She'd needed the firm to appear viable long enough to maximize lifestyle funding. And she'd needed to document it all on social media to prove to Chicago she'd upgraded since leaving Rufus. But the moment my withdrawal collapsed, Kenton's finances, her extraction timeline accelerated. Storage unit already established. Separate accounts already open. Rufus already briefed and waiting. Exit complete. Kenton was about to lose more than his business. He was about to discover his entire marriage had been a performance with a scheduled closing date. And I was going to be watching when that curtain fell. I spent September 28th writing down the rules, not for revenge, but for making sure that when Kenton's world collapsed, I could still look at myself in the mirror. Elaine's 4-month extraction operation sat documented in 47 pages on my desk. Kenton was about to discover his marriage was a performance. But before that curtain fell, I needed to ensure I remained the father, not just another person in his life who'd hurt him. I took out a legal pad and wrote, Rule 1, no gloating. No, I told you so. Let the consequences speak for themselves. Rule 2, no interference. I withdraw support, then step back. What happens after is Kenton's lesson to learn, not mine to control. Rule 3, no contact unless Kenton initiates. The silence teaches as much as the consequences. Rule 4, if he asks why, answer honestly but briefly. Facts, not feelings. Timeline, not accusations. Rule 5, Rose's question, am I doing this to hurt him or teach him? The answer determines whether I'm a father or just another person he hurt. I choose father. Fathers teach. I read the rules 3 times, making sure each one passed the mirror test. Could I justify this to Rose? Could I justify it to myself in 10 years? Could I look at my grandson someday and explain why his grandfather did what he did? Yes. Because enabling Kenton's entitlement would have dishonored Rose's sacrifice more than withdrawing support ever could. The withdrawal notice had been filed September 5th. The guarantee voided September 8th. Kenton's credit facility was already dead, he just didn't know it yet. My moral framework wasn't about whether to pull the trigger. That trigger had been pulled 4 weeks ago. This was about how I conducted myself while watching the bullet travel. 2 days later, September 30th, My phone started ringing at 10:17 a.m., Kenton's name on the screen. I didn't answer. He called again at 10:34, again at 11:02, at 11:45, at 12:18, at 12:53, at 1:07. 7 calls in 3 hours. Each one went to voicemail. I could see the durations: 43 seconds, 1 minute, 12 seconds, 2 minutes, 8 seconds. The messages getting longer, the panic escalating. I played the first one on speaker. Dad, call me back. The bank is saying something about a termination notice. This has to be a mistake. Call me. The second, Dad, it's me again. They're saying you filed this in September 5th. Why wouldn't you tell me, please call? The third was 2 minutes of increasingly frantic explanation about his lender questioning the guarantee status about credit facility showing termination filed, about not understanding how this could happen without warning. You think silence is passive? It's not. Silence is a choice. Every unanswered call is me saying, I'm done being your safety net, done being your ATM, done being the father who rescues you from yourself. The teaching starts when the talking stops. I deleted all 7 voicemails without listening to the rest. Words were over. I'd spent 40 years talking, explaining, offering advice Kenton never took, expressing concerns he never addressed, asking for respect he never gave. Talking had accomplished nothing except making me complicit in the illusion that our relationship was reciprocal. Silence was the final boundary, the last line between enabling and teaching. Kenton had called 7 times. I'd answered 0. That ratio would hold until he learned that fathers aren't banks, that respect isn't optional, that relationships severed by entitlement don't get to keep making withdrawals. On October 2nd, I sat down to prepare the final notification. 3 emails, same message, sent simultaneously at 9 a.m. October 3rd to First Liberty Bank, Atlantic Commercial Credit, and Kenton's business account. Subject line: guarantee termination. Final notice. Body text. This communication serves as formal notification that the personal guarantee executed by Bernard Sutton on behalf of Sutton Wealth Advisors was terminated effective September 8, 2023, pursuant to Clause 7B of the original agreement. Termination notice was filed September 5, 2023. 72-hour notice period completed September 8, 2023 at 9:03 a.m. All financial obligations, liabilities, and commitments related to said guarantee are hereby dissolved. Bernard Sutton assumes no responsibility for debts, obligations, or operational requirements of Sutton Wealth Advisors beyond the effective termination date. Attached. Complete timeline of termination process clause. 7B documentation. Confirmation of filing. No further correspondence on this matter will be acknowledged. Clinical. Legal. Final. No explanations. No justifications. No acknowledgement of the baptism exclusion. The Instagram exploitation. The 40 years of sacrifice converted to line items in a business plan. Just facts and timeline. For 40 years, I was the trampoline under Kenton's tightrope. Tomorrow, I become the ground. And he's about to discover how far the fall really is when there's nothing breaking it. I attached the documentation. The guarantee with Clause 7B highlighted the termination notice filed September 5th with postal confirmation, the bank's acknowledgement dated September 8th. Every piece of evidence showing this had happened legally, properly, and irreversibly 4 weeks ago. While Kenton was thanking me for money I never agreed to send, while he was signing lease amendments for expansion space, while he was scheduling contractors and promising landlords and operating under the delusion that his father's support was permanent. The business had been dead since September 8th. Kenton just hadn't noticed the corpse he'd been animating for 25 days. I scheduled the 3 emails for 9 a.m. October 3rd. Same moment, same message. First Liberty would receive legal confirmation. Atlantic Commercial Credit would receive notice that their collateral had evaporated. and Kenton would receive the truth he'd been operating without for nearly a month. The clock on my computer showed 11:47 p.m. October 2nd. In 9 hours and 13 minutes, Kenton would open an email that would explain why 7 banks had rejected his refinancing applications, why his lender had been asking strange questions about guarantee status, why the foundation he'd built everything on had disappeared without warning. Except there had been warning. 25 days of warning delivered in legal notices he'd apparently ignored or never received because he'd been too busy planning expansions on borrowed time. I looked at the scheduled emails ready to deploy at dawn. 3 bullets already fired weeks ago finally about to hit their targets. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. Kenton discovers that the guarantee evaporated 4 weeks ago while he was planning expansions and making promises. Tomorrow, reality shifts completely. I turned off my computer and went to bed. Chapter 5 would begin with an explosion, and I would be watching from a safe distance, having already completed my role, father who taught instead of enabled, who withdrew support to restore dignity, who chose consequences over comfort, because that's what love looks like when respect has been dead for years. The lesson would be painful. But pain I'd learned was sometimes the only teacher entitled people ever heard. The confirmation came from Bernice at 9:02 a.m. on October 5th. Guarantee obligation terminated, effective immediately, irreversible. The emails had deployed at 9 a.m. on October 3rd as scheduled. 3 bullets fired simultaneously. First, Liberty Bank, Atlantic Commercial Credit, Kenton's business account. Same subject line. Same attachment. Same irreversible truth delivered at the speed of an automated email system. Now, 48 hours later, I needed confirmation that the execution had completed. I called Bernice from my kitchen, coffee growing cold beside me. "Bernard, I was expecting your call. Is it done? As of 9 a.m. today, your obligation is terminated. The bank sent final notice to Atlantic Commercial Credit at 9:01 a.m. There is no reversal mechanism, no negotiation window. The guarantee is void." How long until Kenton's credit facility realizes Atlantic Commercial already froze the line? Happened at 9:03 a.m. when they received our notice. Kenton's firm can't draw additional funds. What's already outstanding, roughly $320,000, now becomes due immediately under the material adverse change provisions. And if he can't pay, then it's default. They'll demand collateral or begin collection proceedings. Given that the firm has no assets beyond receivables and Kenton has no personal collateral, she paused. "Bernard, this is complete structural collapse. The credit facility was their operational bloodline. Without it, they can't make payroll, can't pay vendors, can't function." "I know. Did Kenton respond to your October 3rd notification?" "No response. Complete silence. His lawyer probably told him to ignore it, to treat it as a negotiating tactic." Bernice's voice carried something between sympathy and satisfaction. That's what lawyers do when they don't understand how badly their client has already lost. She was right. Kenton had received the October 3rd email I'd gotten the red receipt at 10:47 a.m. that morning. He'd opened it, read the subject line, "Guarantee Termination, Final Notice," clicked the attachment showing the complete timeline. And then apparently, his lawyer had convinced him it was Bernard posturing for attention, leveraging for negotiation, playing hardball to force a conversation. Except I wasn't negotiating. I was notifying. There's a difference. October 3rd, Bernard sent the notification. October 5th, bank executed termination. October 7th, Elaine discovered it. Kenton still didn't believe it. 3 days, 3 realizations, 1 collapse in progress. 2 days later, on October 7th, Cora called me. "Bernard, I know you don't want to interfere, but I thought you should know I saw Elaine at the grocery store this morning. She looked terrified, physically shaking. Bought 3 bottles of wine and nothing else." "When?" "About an hour ago, 11 a.m. I thanked Cora and hung up. Elaine had discovered it. The credit freeze, the collapsed facility, the reality that Bernard's October 3rd email wasn't posturing. I didn't have to imagine what happened next. Bernice called 30 minutes later with an update. Bernard Elaine just called the bank, frantic, asking about the credit line status, about whether the freeze could be reversed, about whether your withdrawal could be negotiated. What did you tell her? That guarantee withdrawals under Clause 7B are final and irreversible. That Atlantic Commercial Credit made their freeze decision independently based on material adverse change. That First Liberty Bank has no authority to reinstate a voided guarantee. How did she respond? She hung up. But Bernard, she sounded panicked. Not sad. Not angry. Panicked. Like someone who just realized their escape window is closing. I'd imagined Kenton's face when he discovered what I'd done. But watching Elaine discover it first, watching her realize her escape window was closing, watching her panic while Kenton sat oblivious, that was better than any confrontation I could have scripted. That evening, Bernice sent me a text. Called Kay's cell 6 times in 20 minutes this afternoon. Frantic voicemails per bank security footage review. Kay finally called back at 5:47 p.m. Conversation lasted 34 minutes. Lots of pointing at laptop screens visible through window. Bernice lived 2 streets over from Kenton's Sewickley Heights house. She'd driven past on her way home from work. Seen the lights on. Seen the silhouettes through the windows. The next morning, she sent photos. Elaine's car in the driveway, trunk open, suitcases visible. The confrontation had happened. Elaine had shown Kenton the bank statements, the credit freeze notification dated October 5th, the reality that Bernard's email wasn't negotiating, it was notifying. And now apparently Elaine was preparing to run. I called Bernice. Can you access their joint account activity? Already pulled it. You'll want to see this. She emailed me screenshots. At 6:23 p.m. on October 7th, 36 minutes after Kenton returned Elaine's frantic calls, she'd initiated 5 wire transfers from their joint checking account. Destination account. Elaine Crawford, personal checking. The maiden name account. The one Kenton didn't know existed. Amounts. $8,000, $12,000, $5,000, $7,500. $3,200. Total $35,700 stripped from joint funds in 17 minutes. But here was the beautiful irony: all 5 transfers showed status pending, account hold. The credit freeze had locked everything. The joint account, the business accounts, even personal accounts tied to Sutton Wealth Advisors' structure. Elaine was trying to steal money that was already frozen, trying to fund her Chicago escape with assets that no longer existed. She was panicking, making mistakes, moving too fast. The October 3rd notification had been dismissed as posturing. The October 5th execution had been processed while Kenton operated in denial. And now, October 7th, Elaine had discovered the collapse was real, and her terror wasn't about saving Sutton Wealth Advisors. It was about whether she could still get to Rufus Riddle in Chicago before the wreckage trapped her with Kenton's debts. Bernice sent one more photo that evening. Elaine's car trunk, still open, laptop visible on the hood. She was typing frantically, phone pressed to her ear. The caption, making calls, lots of calls, probably to Chicago. Elaine grabbed her laptop and started transferring money from their joint account to her separate account, the one Kenton didn't know existed, the one with Rufus Riddle's name on the wire transfer history. She was moving fast, panicked, making mistakes a careful planner wouldn't make. Kenton watched her type frantically, still not understanding that the money she was stealing from their joint account was already gone, that the credit freeze meant every account tied to Sutton Wealth Advisors was locked, that she was trying to steal from a corpse. The question was whether Kenton would realize his marriage was ending before he realized his business was dead. Nigel's voice on the phone was calm, but his words hit me like lightning. Bernard, you're not just protected, Kenton's own paperwork made your position bulletproof. Elaine had been frantically transferring money to her secret account when I'd last checked in with Bernice. Kenton still didn't understand the collapse was complete. But that was October 7th. Now, 3 days later, Nigel was calling with legal confirmation that would seal everything. I sat down at my kitchen table. Explain. I've been reviewing the guarantee documentation since the October 5th execution. The personal guarantee Kenton had you sign 3 years ago contains standard protective clauses, including one allowing revocation with 48-hour notice if the firm undergoes material ownership changes without guarantor consent. I know, that's the clause we used. Right. But here's what I just discovered: Kenton diluted your shares. Last year, he brought in outside investors, gave them 20% equity without consulting you, without your consent as guarantor. He did it quietly, buried it in quarterly reports he never sent you. I straightened. He what? He changed the ownership structure of the firm you were guaranteeing. That's the exact trigger for the revocation clause. Bernard Kenton unknowingly armed you with the perfect legal weapon. His own actions trying to dilute your stake, bringing in investors to marginalize you, those actions gave you ironclad legal grounds to withdraw. The irony was perfect. Kenton had been trying to edge me out to reduce my percentage to nothing while keeping my guarantee in place. And in doing so, he'd triggered the exact clause that let me walk away legally protected. So even if he tries to sue, he can't. The ownership change happened without your consent. You have documentary proof you were never notified. Any court would rule in your favor immediately. Bernard, you're not just protected. You're bulletproof. I felt something settle in my chest. Vindication. Not the emotional kind, the legal kind. The kind that meant I'd done this right, that every step had been defensible, that when this was over, I could still look at myself in the mirror. Thank you, Nigel. There's more. The SEC might come calling. They're investigating Kenton's firm for— I know, I interrupted. If they do, I'll cooperate fully. 2 days later, on October 12th, I watched the final collapse unfold in real time. I stood by the window, phone in hand, staring at the city below. Somewhere out there, Kenton was still playing the big shot, still believing he'd gotten away with it. In 60 seconds, I would make one phone call and end him. Was I really going to do this? My hand trembled slightly, not from doubt, but from the weight of certainty. I dialed Atlantic Commercial Credit's commercial lending department. This is Bernard Sutton. I'm calling to confirm execution of guarantee revocation filed September 5th, effective October 5th. The account manager pulled up the records. Yes, Mr. Sutton. Your guarantee was terminated October 5th at 9:03 a.m. The borrower's credit facility was flagged for review that same day, and the facility was frozen October 5th at 9:15 a.m. Outstanding balance of $322,000 becomes due immediately under material adverse change provisions. We've sent multiple notices to the borrower. Have they responded? No, sir. We're preparing to initiate collection proceedings. I thanked him and hung up. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number. Pittsburgh area code. I answered. Mr. Sutton. This is Trevor Holt, junior analyst at Sutton Wealth Advisors. I'm calling because we're having a crisis, and I can't reach Kenton or Elaine, and I thought maybe you— In the background, I could hear chaos, shouting, something crashing, a woman crying. What's happening, Marcus? The bank called. They're demanding immediate repayment of our credit line. $322,000. They said our guarantee was revoked and the line is frozen and we have 48 hours to pay or they'll— Mr. Sutton, we don't have that kind of liquidity. We can't make payroll, we can't— More shouting in the background. Kenton's voice, I realized, raised and desperate. Where's Kenton now? He's on the phone with someone, screaming at them. Elaine locked herself in her office. Mr. Sutton, is this real? Did you actually revoke the guarantee? Yes. Silence. Then, oh God, we're done. We're completely— He hung up. Yes. Silence. Then, oh God, we're done. We're completely— He hung up. My phone started buzzing immediately. Kenton's name on the screen. I didn't answer. It buzzed again, and again, and again. 14 calls in 30 minutes. Each one going to voicemail. Each one ignored. I turned the phone face down on the table and walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and drank it slowly. Behind me, the buzzing continued, desperate, insistent, futile. I'd waited months for this sound. The bank's automated systems had done exactly what Nigel predicted. Guarantee revoked, credit flagged as unsecured facility, frozen repayment demanded. No negotiation, no grace period, just immediate catastrophic collapse. Kenton had been operating under the assumption that his father's support was permanent. That guarantees once given couldn't be withdrawn. That family obligation meant unconditional backing. He'd learned the difference between obligation and choice. My phone buzzed again. Kenton. Again. I walked to my study and pulled out the folder labeled Prosecution Evidence. Inside the baptism program, with my name erased, Elaine's PR. Memo screenshots of luxury spending, proof of Kenton's ownership dilution. Evidence of every calculated exclusion and exploitation. This wasn't revenge. This was consequence. Natural, legal, defensible consequence. The phone buzzed 17 times that afternoon. Kenton. Kenton. Unknown numbers that were probably Kenton calling from different phones. Elaine twice. I answered none of them. By 5 p.m. the calls stopped. Bernice texted, Kay showed up at bank demanding meeting. Security escorted him out. E's separate account transfers, all failed account holds. They have nothing. I sat in my study as the October sun set over Pittsburgh, casting orange light through the window. 40 years of building Kenton's foundation. 3 months of planning its removal. 1 week of watching it collapse. The firm had zero liquidity. The credit facility was frozen. The guarantee was void. Kenton and Elaine had no moves left, no options, no escape routes that weren't already blocked by their own actions and my careful documentation. That evening, my phone rang from an unknown number with a Washington, D.C. area code. When I answered, a formal voice identified herself as an investigator from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Mr. Sutton, this is Elena Rodriguez from the SEC's Division of Enforcement. We're investigating Sutton Wealth Advisors for potential securities fraud and would like to schedule an interview with you regarding your involvement with the firm. I sat very still. I'm not involved with the firm. I withdrew my guarantee. Yes, we're aware. That's actually part of what triggered our investigation. We'd still like to speak with you. Are you available tomorrow afternoon? Kenton slammed my door so hard the frame rattled. His face was red, his fists clenched, and he was shouting before I could even look up. The SEC investigator had called 3 days ago. I'd agreed to the interview, answered every question honestly, provided documentation of Kenton's share dilution and my guarantee withdrawal. Elena Rodriguez had thanked me for my cooperation and said I wasn't under investigation, I was a witness. Now apparently, Kenton had discovered that fact. You destroyed me, your own son. What kind of father does that? I stood slowly from my kitchen table. The kind whose son stole from him, lied to him, and called him a pathetic old man. I never... You did. 3 years ago, at the firm's holiday party. You were drunk, and you told your colleagues I was a pathetic old furnace tech who didn't understand business. Cora heard you. She told me. Kenton's face went pale, then red again. That was I was drunk. It didn't mean... It meant exactly what you said. Just like the baptism exclusion meant exactly what Elaine wrote in that PR. Just like the Instagram campaign meant exactly what it demonstrated, that I was too blue-collar for your brand. So you ruined me. You pulled the guarantee knowing it would collapse everything. I withdrew support that was predicated on family relationship. You severed that relationship. Clause 7B, your own paperwork. The SEC came to my office yesterday. Kenton said, his voice shaking. They asked about client funds. about how I structured investments, about whether I misrepresented returns to investors. Did you? That's not, you can't just, Dad, they're talking about fraud charges, criminal fraud, prison. I watched my son fall apart in front of me, and I felt nothing. No, that's a lie. I felt satisfaction. The SEC didn't call about me, Kenton. They called about you. They asked if I knew about your business practices. I said I didn't because I didn't. You excluded me from everything, remember blue-collar associations. You told them, I told them the truth, that you diluted my shares without my consent, that you used my guarantee while cutting me out of decision-making, that you excluded me from my grandson's baptism for PR purposes. I paused. I provided documentation, all of it. Kenton stared at me. You're cooperating with them. You're helping them build a case against me. I'm answering questions honestly. There's a difference. You want me to go to prison. I want you to experience consequences. If those consequences include prison because you committed crimes, that's between you and the law. He lunged forward, grabbed my shoulders. I'm your son. You are my son. Now you're the man who stole from me, humiliated me, and converted 40 years of sacrifice into a business plan line item. The SEC didn't come after you because of me. They came because of what you did. Kenton's hands dropped. He staggered back. Elaine said she said you were bluffing, that the withdrawal was posturing, that we should ignore it. How's that working out? He left without another word. 3 days later, Bernice called with an update I didn't expect. Bernard, Elaine's leaving. Literally. Right now. I drove past the Sewickley house and her car is packed. Kenton's on the porch watching her load suitcases. I felt a cold satisfaction. Chicago. Probably. She withdrew what little cash she could access yesterday. Bought a one-way plane ticket. I didn't need to imagine what happened next. Cora texted me photos 30 minutes later. Elaine's Mercedes loaded with designer bags. Kenton standing in the driveway, hands hanging at his sides. The final betrayal. That evening, Cora knocked on my door. I thought you'd want to know. Elaine told Kenton she's going back to Rufus in Chicago. She said it loud enough that I heard it from my garden. What exactly did she say? That Rufus has a real future, and Kenton doesn't. That she stayed for the lifestyle, and the lifestyle's gone. Cora shook her head. She said she never loved him. Just the money. I thanked Cora and closed the door. Kenton had lost his business, lost his credit, lost his father's support, and now lost his wife to the realization that she'd been using him as a temporary financial vehicle while maintaining contact with her real target in Chicago. The door clicked shut. The house was silent. I sat in my study thinking about Rose, about whether she'd approve of what I'd done, about whether watching Kenton lose everything made me a good father or just another person who'd hurt him. Then I remembered this baptism program with my name erased, the PR memo about blue-collar associations, the Instagram posts hashtagging my grandson, the business plan listing my love as a required investment. I'd taught him about consequences. That's what fathers do. That night, an email arrived from an address I didn't recognize, jmk1987@protonmail.com. Subject line, "You're not the only one he betrayed, we should talk." I opened it. The message was brief. "Mr. Sutton, you don't know me, but I know what your son did to you. He did worse to us. There are 3 of us. We've been building a case for 2 years. We think you have information that could help. Attached is proof we're legitimate." The attachment was a photo. Kenton standing outside a federal courthouse with 3 people I'd never seen before. The date stamp, August 2021, 2 years ago. Kenton looked different in the photo, younger, more confident. The 3 people with him looked professional, business attire, serious expressions. I stared at the image, trying to understand what I was seeing. A courthouse. 2 years ago. Before the baptism, before the guarantee, before any of this started, before any... What had Kenton done 2 years ago that involved a federal courthouse and 3 people who now wanted to talk to me about betrayal? I hit reply, "Who are you and what did Kenton do?" The response came in 2 minutes. Investment fraud. He took $2.3 million from a group of doctors. We're 3 of the 5 victims. The other 2 settled. We didn't. We want justice. And we think your withdrawal just gave us the leverage we need to get it. I sat back processing. Kenton hadn't just betrayed his father. He'd been running schemes for years, multiple victims, federal courthouse appearances, settlement attempts. The baptism exclusion wasn't the beginning. It was just the moment I'd finally noticed a pattern that had been running much longer. My phone buzzed. Another email from JMK1987. We're meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. at Cafe Allegro in Shadyside. We'd like you to join us. We think together we can make sure your son never does this to anyone else again. The strangers in the photo stared back at me from my screen. Who were they, and what did Kenton do to them? The email from JMK1987 had invited me to Cafe Allegro tomorrow at 2 p.m. 3 fraud victims who wanted my help ensuring Kenton faced justice. $2.3 million. Multiple victims. A federal courthouse appearance 2 years ago that I'd known nothing about. I could go. I could meet them, just hear their stories, add my documentation to theirs. I could help build an airtight case that would send my son to prison for years instead of months. I could join their revenge campaign and ensure Kenton's destruction was complete, thorough, and permanent. I stared at the courthouse photo, zooming in on the faces. 3 people. Professional. Serious. 2 men, 1 woman. All middle-aged, all wearing business attire. Then I recognized one of them. Dr. Michael Brennan, 58. Cardiologist. I'd fixed his furnace 6 years ago, stayed for coffee. Talked about his daughter's wedding. Nice man. Generous tipper. Kenton had defrauded someone I knew. Someone from my own professional network. The betrayals didn't just extend beyond family. They extended into my own circle, touching people I'd worked with, people I'd helped. How many others had trusted my son and been burned? How deep did his betrayals go? How many? Dr. Brennans were out there, people who'd believed Kenton's promises and lost their savings. I could find out. The email sat there waiting for my response. 1 click, and I'd have access to everything: victim statements, financial records, evidence of schemes I'd never imagined. But then what? I'd spend the next year obsessed with Kenton's crimes. Meetings with victims, strategy sessions with lawyers, testimony preparation, court appearances. Every day consumed by the question of how to destroy my son more completely. Would that honor Rose? Would that reclaim my peace? Would that make me the kind of man I wanted to be at 67? I thought about the moral rules I'd written on September 28th. Rule 1, no gloating. Rule 2, no interference. Rule 3, no contact unless Kenton initiates. Rule 5, Rose's question, am I doing this to hurt him or teach him? Joining a revenge campaign with 3 strangers violated every rule I'd set for myself. I'd withdrawn the guarantee, filed the paperwork, documented the exclusion, let natural consequences unfold. Kenton had lost his business, his credit, his wife, his reputation. The SEC was investigating. The victims had their own case building. What more did I need to achieve? What would joining them accomplish, except converting me from a father who taught consequences into just another person consumed by spite? I could join them, dig deeper, destroy him completely, I said aloud to the empty room. But that would mean letting him define the rest of my life. I'd already won. The guarantee was withdrawn. The lesson was delivered. The consequences were unfolding. Kenton would face justice from the SEC, from his victims, from his creditors. The legal machinery was already in motion. My role was finished. Continuing would be about revenge, not education. About destruction, not dignity. About ensuring my son suffered as much as possible, not about teaching him that respect matters and consequences are real. Rose wouldn't want that. She'd want me to step back, let justice run its course, and reclaim the peace I'd sacrificed for 40 years of enabling. I clicked reply to the email and typed, "I appreciate you reaching out, but I've decided to step back and let the legal process handle this. I hope you find the justice you deserve. My involvement ends here." My finger hovered over the send button. Then I deleted the draft. Why explain? Why justify? Why give them hope that I might change my mind? I selected the original email and moved it to trash. Then I emptied the trash folder. Gone. My finger hovered over the delete button for a long moment. Then I clicked it and felt lighter than I had in months. The strangers in the courthouse photo disappeared. Dr. Brennan's face frozen in professional seriousness. The unknown victims who wanted my help. All of it gone. I'd chosen dignity over vengeance, education over destruction, peace over spite. Kenton would face consequences. But they'd come from the law, from his victims, from the natural aftermath of his own actions. Not from his father joining a revenge campaign. I stood from my desk, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. Outside October, rain started falling, the kind of steady evening rain that washes everything clean. The rest was just noise. I'd taught my lesson, now I was done. I turned off my computer and went to bed early that night, sleeping better than I had since June 15th, when Elaine had said those 3 words, "We did it yesterday." 4 months, June to October. The entire arc from discovery to execution to resolution. I'd withdrawn support, documented exclusion, let consequences unfold, and maintained my dignity throughout. That was enough. 2 weeks later, on November 3rd, Nigel called with unexpected news. Bernard Kenton's lawyer reached out. They want to settle. Settle what I'm not suing him. No, but he owes you money. The original investment, the $150,000. It's technically still a loan to the business, and the business is being liquidated to satisfy creditors. His lawyer is proposing a formal settlement agreement. I'll never see that money. The creditors, actually you might. Your loan predates most of his other obligations. And there's something else in the offer. Something I think you'll want to see in person. We met at Nigel's office the next afternoon. He slid a document across the conference table, formal settlement agreement, Kenton's signature at the bottom, dated November 1st. The terms were simple. Bernard waives claim to the original investment. In exchange, Kenton signs over full ownership of Sutton Wealth Advisors' name trademark and client list what little value remained. But at the bottom, attached as Exhibit A, was something I never expected to see again. Shares. Original stock certificates in my name dated from when the business first incorporated. 5% equity in Sutton Wealth Advisors, signed by both of us 3 years ago. Kenton was offering to return what he'd diluted to restore the partnership he'd secretly undermined. The document sat between us, waiting for my decision. I stood in the doorway of Kenton's office on a Thursday morning, and the silence hit me before anything else. No ringing phones. No voices discussing portfolios or market trends. Just empty desks with dark computer screens and a reception area that looked like everyone had walked out mid-shift. The SEC investigation had gone public 3 days ago. Nigel had warned me this would happen, that once Kenton's clients learned about the credit freeze and the forged guarantees they'd run. I hadn't expected to see the aftermath myself, but Nigel thought I should witness what my son had built and what he'd lost. The receptionist's desk still had a coffee mug with lipstick on the rim. Someone's jacket hung on a chair. It looked like the end of the world had come quietly, without drama, just people walking away. I moved down the hallway toward Kenton's private office. The door was open. He sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen with the kind of stillness that comes after shock wears off and reality sets in. He didn't look up when I entered. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The office was silent. No phones, no voices, just me. Finally, Kenton's voice came out flat, almost mechanical. Marcus Webb left an hour ago. Took his entire portfolio, 2.3 million. Said he'd already moved it to Merrill Lynch. He clicked his mouse, scrolling through what looked like a spreadsheet. Before that, Elena Rodriguez pulled 1.8 million. Michael Brennan 1.5. They didn't even want to discuss it. Just signed the paperwork and left. I stayed near the door, watching him catalog his losses like he was reading someone else's autopsy report. How many are left? I asked. None. He looked up then and his eyes were hollow. The last one walked out 20 minutes before you got here. Told me he'd called you 6 months ago to warn you about the guarantee I was using. Said you thanked him for the information. That was the first twist the client who'd tried to help me who'd seen through Kenton's scheme long before I did. I'd forgotten about that call, or maybe I'd filed it away with all the other small warnings I'd ignored because I wanted to believe my son was better than this. Kenton's laugh was bitter sharp. You knew. You knew for 6 months that I was misrepresenting your position, and you didn't say anything. You just waited, watched me dig deeper. I didn't know what to do with the information, I said quietly. I thought maybe you'd made a mistake, that you'd fix it. A mistake. He shook his head. No, Dad. It was a strategy. Elaine's strategy. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a stack of printed emails, maybe 30 pages held together with a binder clip. He slid them across the desk toward me. Found these in her cloud account. She never deleted anything, probably thought I'd never look. I picked up the stack and started reading. The first email was dated 2 years ago, before Kenton and Elaine were even engaged. It was from Elaine to Rufus Riddle, her ex-boyfriend. The subject line read, Phase 1 complete. The message detailed how she'd convinced Kenton to propose how she'd identified me as the real asset in the relationship, and how she planned to extract maximum value before the divorce. My stomach turned. I flipped through more emails. One from 14 months ago outlined the guarantee scheme Elaine had researched. It found examples of other advisors using family wealth as leverage and drafted the exact language Kenton had used in his client materials. Another email from 8 months ago discussed Rufus's role. He'd stay out of sight, avoid any contact with Kenton, and wait for the payout once Kenton's business collapsed, and Elaine could claim a share of my assets in the divorce settlement. The second twist hit me like a fist to the chest. Elaine hadn't fallen out of love with Kenton. She'd never loved him at all. She'd married him specifically to get access to my money, and Rufus had been her partner in it from the beginning. Every smile, every family dinner, every time she'd called me Dad, it had all been performance. I'd destroyed my relationship with my father for a woman who never loved me. That's what Kenton had said a month ago, standing in my living room. He'd known by then, or suspected, and he'd still fought me, still tried to defend her, because admitting the truth meant admitting he'd been played from the start. I set the emails down on the desk. When did you find these? 2 nights ago. His voice cracked. Nigel subpoenaed her cloud account as part of the divorce discovery. Her lawyer didn't scrub it in time. He gestured at the empty office around us. None of this matters now. The business is done. The clients are gone. The SEC is probably going to fine me, maybe suspend my license. And Elaine's already moved back in with Rufus. Took Zane with her. I haven't seen my son in 4 days. I felt the anger I'd carried for months start to shift into something else. Something I wasn't ready to name yet. Kenton had stolen from me, lied to me, destroyed my trust. But he'd also been a tool in someone else's plan, and he'd lost everything because of it. That didn't erase what he'd done. It didn't mean I forgave him, but it changed the shape of the story. I picked up the emails again, folded them, and put them in my jacket pocket. I'm going to talk to Nigel, I said. There might be a way to use these in your divorce case. If Elaine planned this from the start, it affects custody asset division everything. Kenton stared at me. Why would you help me? Because Zane's still my grandson, I said. And because you're still my son, even when I wish you weren't. I left him there in the empty office and drove straight to Nigel's office downtown. We spent 3 hours going through the emails building a strategy. By the time I got home that night, Nigel had drafted a motion to modify custody and scheduled an emergency hearing. The next morning, I stood on Kenton's porch with Nigel beside me holding a leather portfolio. Through the front window, I could see my son sitting on his couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes. I rang the doorbell and waited. Kenton opened the door, looking like he hadn't slept in days. We spent 2 hours at his kitchen table going through the strategy, how Elaine's emails proved fraud, how they'd affect custody. Kenton signed every document Nigel put in front of him. He didn't thank me. I didn't expect him to. 3 days later, I sat in a different room at a different table signing my late wife's name onto a trust document, the Rose Sutton Education Fund, and felt peace for the first time in months. Bernice Blanchard had helped me structure everything. The settlement with Kenton's firm had returned most of my original investment, and I'd decided to put a significant portion into an irrevocable education trust for my grandson. Zane sat in a carrier beside me, 13 months old, now chewing on a plastic ring and making the small noises that babies make when they're content. He had no idea what any of this meant. Someday he would. Your grandmother Rose would be proud of this, I said, more to myself than to him. Zane looked up at me with wide eyes. Kenton's eyes the same gray-blue I'd seen in my son's baby pictures. Bernice finished notarizing the documents and smiled. Bernard, you've turned something ugly into something beautiful. Not many people could do that. It's the only way I could make sense of it, I said. The money was supposed to be for family. It still will be, just not the way I planned. The trust was ironclad. Zane would have access to funds for education expenses starting at age 16, with full disbursement for college or vocational training at 18. If he didn't pursue education, the funds would roll into a scholarship program for HVAC apprenticeships in Pittsburgh. Either way, the money would help the next generation build something real. Bernice gathered the papers. I heard about the custody case. How's that progressing? Hearings next week, I said. Nigel thinks the emails will be enough. Elaine's already left the state, moved to Chicago with Rufus. Didn't even ask for visitation. Bernice's face darkened. She just walked away from her own son. I nodded. Elaine had abandoned Zane when she realized there was no money left to extract. Kenton's parents-in-law had taken temporary custody. They were decent people, horrified by what their daughter had done. They'd agreed to let me visit Zane twice a week and supported the trust completely. Even her own son wasn't worth staying for without money. That was the truth. Elaine hadn't just married Kenton for access to my wealth. She'd had a child with him as leverage insurance, another way to secure a payout. When the plan collapsed, she discarded Zane like everything else. I looked down at my grandson, reaching for my finger with his small hand. He squeezed it, smiled, made a sound that might have been a laugh. Rose never got to meet Zane. She died a year before he was born, but somehow this felt like introducing them. He'll never remember her, I said quietly. Elaine, by the time he's old enough to understand, she'll just be a name in court documents. Maybe that's better, Bernice said. He'll have you. He'll have his maternal grandparents. He'll have people who stayed. I signed the final page and Bernice placed the folder in her office safe. The trust was live now, funded, protected. No matter what happened with Kenton's legal troubles, Zane's future was secure. We left the bank just after 11. I drove Zane back to his grandparents' house in Greenfield and spent an hour on the floor playing with wooden blocks while he knocked them over and laughed. His grandfather, Tom, watched from the doorway. "You're good with him," he said. "Better than Kenton ever was." I didn't respond. Tom was angry, and I couldn't blame him. His daughter had turned out to be someone he didn't recognize. That evening, Cora Knight knocked on my door with a casserole dish in her hands. She'd been doing that for weeks now, bringing food, checking in, making sure I wasn't alone. "Everyone in the neighborhood has been talking Bernard," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "You handled this with such grace. I don't think anyone could have done better." "I didn't have much choice," I said. "It was either handle it or let it destroy me." "You had choices," Cora corrected. "You could have been vindictive. You could have aired everything publicly. You could have cut Kenton off completely. You didn't. You fought for your grandson, set up that trust. And you did it without turning into the kind of person who'd do what Kenton did." She leaned forward. "Kenton thought success was about flash and status, but you showed him what real character looks like. The whole street's been watching how you carried yourself through this, how you never badmouthed anyone, how you just kept your dignity intact." I hadn't realized the neighborhood was paying that much attention. I'd been so focused on surviving each day that I hadn't thought about what it looked like from the outside. "People see more than we think," Cora continued. "They saw Kenton's arrogance when he bought that house in Sewickley Heights. They saw Elaine's act, and they saw you fixing furnaces, living modestly, treating everyone with respect. You didn't just win financially, Bernard. You won morally, and everyone sees it." The neighborhood had watched the entire drama unfold and chosen a side. My side. Not because I'd asked them to, but because they'd measured both of us and found Kenton wanting. That was the real victory, not the settlement, not the trust, but the community's verdict. When had winning ever felt this quiet, this certain, this complete? Cora stayed for another hour, talking about normal things, safe things. When she left, I washed the dishes, turned off the lights, and sat in my living room in the dark. The house was quiet. The street outside was quiet. Everything felt settled, resolved, finished. Then I saw the envelope on the floor by the front door. Someone must have slipped it through the mail slot while Cora and I were talking. I picked it up and recognized Kenton's handwriting immediately. No return address. Postmarked from somewhere in Pennsylvania. I held it unopened for a long moment, uncertain whether I wanted to read what my son had finally found the courage to say. I opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Kenton's handwriting was shaky, almost illegible in places. The letter started without greeting or preamble. The office was empty except for me and the echo of everything I'd destroyed. I sat down and kept reading. He described the final day at Sutton Wealth Advisors. How the last employee had cleared out her desk while he sat in his office pretending to work. How the landlord had called about unpaid rent. How the SEC had scheduled his hearing for January. How Elaine had sent divorce papers from Chicago with a note that said, "Don't contact me about Zane. My parents will handle custody arrangements." She'd walked away from her own son without a second glance. Kenton wrote about sitting in that empty office for hours, looking at the framed photos on his desk. His wedding day, Zane's birth, the grand opening of the firm. All of it built on lies and leverage. All of it gone. "I traded my father for a percentage," he wrote. "Elaine never loved me. She loved what I could take from him. And now I have nothing. No clients, no wife, no son, no father. I destroyed it all for money I never got to keep." The letter went on for 3 pages, circling the same themes: regret, shame, disbelief that he'd been so blind. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for anything. He just needed me to know that he finally understood what he'd done. I read it twice, then set it aside and pulled out a piece of my own stationery. I wrote one line, "When you're ready to be my son instead of my business partner, you know where to find me." I mailed it the next morning. That was the truth I'd learned through all of this. Kenton had treated our relationship like a transaction: inputs and outputs, costs and benefits, return on investment. He'd calculated that my money was worth more than my respect. And when I'd refused to keep funding that equation, he'd tried to take what he wanted by force. My entire plan had never been about destroying him. It had been about showing him the difference between a transaction and a relationship. Money changes hands. Love doesn't. 2 weeks passed. I spent them with Zane visiting his grandparents' house in Greenfield, playing on the floor, reading books, teaching him to stack blocks higher than his head. He was talking now, just a few words: gamma, up, more. He'd learned to say pa for me, which made Tom smile every time. On December 15th, a Tuesday afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it and found Kenton standing on my porch, thinner than I'd ever seen him, wearing jeans and an old Pitt sweatshirt instead of his usual suit. He looked like the kid who used to help me carry pipe wrenches to job sites. "Hi, Dad," he said quietly. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat in the living room, the same room where he'd tried to pressure me into signing over my house 6 months ago. The silence stretched between us. Finally, Kenton spoke. "I'm sorry, Dad. I chose money over you, and I lost everything. I lost myself. I don't know if you can ever forgive me, but I needed to say it to your face. I'm sorry." I looked at my son, really looked at him. The arrogance was gone. The flash, the performance, the salesman's smile. What was left was just Kenton, broken and honest. "I know, son," I said. "The question is, what are you going to do now?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm living in a studio apartment in Bloomfield, working part-time at a sporting goods store while I figure out if the SEC is going to revoke my license. Trying to get visitation rights with Zane. Just trying to rebuild something real." I nodded. "You can see Zane here if you want. I visit him twice a week. His grandparents won't mind." Kenton's eyes filled. "You'd do that for Zane," I said. "And for you. But not because you're owed it. Because you're my son, and I love you even when I don't like you." The following week, Kenton joined me for a visit to Tom's house. I was on the floor with Zane, teaching him how his shoes worked, how the laces went through the holes. Kenton sat on the couch watching us, and when I looked up, I saw something in his face I hadn't seen in years. His eyes tracked my hands as I worked the laces through the eyelets, watching the way Zane laughed when I tugged the bow tight. Whatever Kenton had been carrying when he walked through that door, the shame, the loss, the weight of everything he had thrown away, I could see it shifting in his face as he watched us. Not entitlement, not calculation, just recognition of what had always been there, waiting for him to see it. On New Year's Eve, I sat alone in my living room, the house quiet, except for the distant sound of fireworks starting early in the neighborhood. I thought about Rose, about the year I'd survived, about the lessons that had cost so much to learn. Rose used to tell me that tough love was the hardest kind to give. "Sometimes people need to fall," she'd said once, talking about Kenton when he was young and reckless. "You can't catch them every time, or they'll never learn to land on their feet." I think I finally understood what she meant. Kenton had lost everything, but maybe that's what it took for him to find himself. He was rebuilding now, slowly, with humility instead of hubris, working an hourly job, taking the bus, showing up for his son without expectation of praise. Had I won or lost, Kenton was broken, but not destroyed, humbled, but not abandoned. Perhaps that was the only victory that mattered. My plan had never been about revenge in the traditional sense. It had been about teaching him that relationships aren't transactions, that being my son wasn't a business arrangement with performance metrics and profit margins. That love doesn't charge fees. I picked up the photo of Rose from the mantel and raised the glass of whiskey I'd poured. "Happy New Year, my love," I said quietly. I think we raised a good man, it just took him a while to remember how to be one. Outside the neighborhood erupted in celebration as midnight approached. Fireworks cracked and boomed. People shouted and laughed. But inside my house I felt only quiet peace. I'd gotten my equity back. I'd secured Zane's future. I'd shown Kenton the difference between respect and exploitation. And I'd done it without becoming the kind of person who'd do what he did. I set down the photo and the glass and spoke the truth out loud one last time so I'd never forget it. "I love you, son, but I will never pay a fee to be your father again." And to you listening to my story, remember this: love isn't something you can buy, sell, or leverage. I spent 40 years building a life with Rose, teaching my son right from wrong. But when he stopped seeing me as his father and started seeing me as a bank account, I had to make the hardest choice of my life. I could have given in, kept the peace, signed everything over, but that wouldn't have taught him anything. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no and mean it. If you're facing something similar, a child, a family member, anyone who treats your kindness like a business transaction, remember that respect has to go both ways. You don't owe anyone access to your life savings just because you share DNA. Setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's necessary. I believe God put me through this trial to teach me the difference between enabling and loving, between being used and being valued. This father-family revenge story isn't about getting even. It's about restoring dignity and teaching the next generation what truly matters. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and standing your ground? Drop a comment below. Your story might help someone else facing the same choice. If this father-family revenge journey resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't yet subscribed to Father Family Revenge for more stories about dignity, family, and finding strength when it matters most, thank you for staying until the very end. This story contains fictionalized elements created for reflection and learning. What I hope you take away isn't the details, it's the lesson: family is built on respect, not transactions.